Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Blaise, Vice President of the Nantucket Civic League. I'd like to welcome you to our forum on Meet the Candidates. Just a quick formal word. This session is being recorded so that should you choose to speak, know that you will be on the recording. And for all of interest, the recording will be posted to YouTube just as soon as our NCTV technical specialist can wrap things up at the end and post it. We're hoping that many more people than those who are online with us now will get to see the forum. What exactly is the Nantucket Civic League? And Ryan, if you'd put up the screen share. We're doing this really so that you can see our logo for the Nantucket Civic League and the fact that this is the Meet the Candidates. The League was founded in 1903. It's an island-wide nonprofit community organization, and it represents 24 neighborhood associations from east to west and north to south on the island. Importantly, its four priorities are preserving our island's resources, educating and informing the public on island issues, and here we are with the forum on Meet the Candidates, improving the quality of living, and encouraging participation in local government. Not all that long ago, we had a forum on how citizens can participate, and we hope that you've looked at that. Now, as we move into the session on Meet the Candidates, we will have our two specialists question the candidates in the contested races. We'll then have a separate panel to question select board candidates on the very critical issue of short-term rentals. And then we will have an open session. Let me say that when we organized this, we tapped all of the candidates who had filed for the election and organized it around them. Since then, we've learned that there are several key write-in candidates, people campaigning for a position, asking the public to write their name in. They will be asked to raise their hand in the question and answer period. And if they indicate that they're a write-in candidate, I'll call on them first so that they can make a 1-minute statement about their candidacy. Now, just a few quick things on Zoom, and then we're going to begin. If you want to be recognized, raise your hand, please. And if you go to the bottom of your screen, if you take your cursor and move it down to the bottom, Zoom flaps up with a series of little icons, one of which is raise hand. On my screen, it's next to the one on the right. Raise your hand, and Ryan will make your microphone go live, and you alone will be speaking to ask your question. Should you feel that you don't want to speak, but you do want to ask a question, move your cursor over to Q&A and write the question, and Ryan will either read it out or give it to me to read. And again, to whomever you address the question will speak. Write-in candidates, I've already said, will be first if they raise their hand. We do recognize that we've got at least one write-in candidate for the planning board, and we may have two for the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board. And by the way, those who were uncontested candidates in those seats are welcome to join in at that same time. Now, let's get going. Let me introduce Chantal Blaise Murphy, who's a longtime resident of Nantucket and currently working for the Nantucket Island Chamber of Commerce as its business manager. She holds seats on several boards and committees, including the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and the Nantucket Equity Advocates. Our other questioner or poser of questions is Josh Balling, managing editor of the Enquirer and Mirror and a veteran of these sessions. And so let us now turn to the town clerk. You know, I have a graduate degree in England. I want to say Clark, but that's okay. Town clerk Nancy Holmes and Robert Wickowski. By the way, if I get a name pronounced wrong, don't sit there in misery. Tell me the correct pronunciation. And Nancy and Robert, the way we're going to work, to be fair, is Nancy will go first with her 2-minute introduction, then Robert. And then when it comes to question time, we'll alternate, or in where we have more than two, we'll rotate around so that everybody gets a chance to be first. And with that, Nancy Holmes, current town clerk for the town of Nantucket, 2 minutes is yours.
Thank you, Lee, and thank you to the members of the Civic League for having me and for hosting this Meet the Candidates for many years. As you said, my name is Nancy Holmes. I'm the current elected town and county clerk. I have been the town clerk for 4 years. I was appointed for 1 year upon the untimely passing of Catherine Stover. I was Catherine's assistant clerk for 9 years, and then I've been the elected clerk for 3 years. Hopefully within my allotted 2 minutes of time, I'd just like to talk a little bit about my experience and qualifications, and then very briefly, what does the town clerk do for any viewers that may not really be certain about that, and then just briefly about what I've done as a clerk and why I'm running. So in addition to my time in the office, which is nearly 14 years, I am a graduate of the New England Municipal Clerks Institute, which is a 3-year summer institute of week-long classes each summer, classes and projects, and that is a nationally and internationally recognized program run by the New England town clerks. And then I am also a certified municipal clerk, which is a certification from the International Institute of Municipal Clerks. And that is a culmination of both that 3-year summer institute, further classes, and experience. My other education is I have a Bachelor of Science in Management and an Associate of Science in a management degree. I'm also a Justice of the Peace. I've officiated hundreds of weddings. I'm a commissioner to qualify for the state. I'm a member of the International Institute of Municipal Clerks, the New England City and Town Clerks, and the Massachusetts Town Clerks Association. And I have extensive contacts within the New England Clerks, networking contacts, a very helpful group. I'm trained in the Massachusetts Town Clerks proprietal programs of the voter registry program, which is a closed voter registry system, the VIP, which is the Vitals Information Partnership for Massachusetts Clerks Vital Records. I have extensive knowledge of laser fees, public records law, vital records law, election and town meeting rules. To touch briefly on what a town clerk does. A town clerk maintains the vital records of the town. Not only things like minutes and planning board decisions, but very importantly, the truly vital records are people's birth, death, and marriage records. And there's a lot of laws that go around the keeping and correcting of those. The town clerk is the chief election officer, maintains the annual census, the voter registry, maintains the voter list, orchestrates the setup and the staffing of the town meeting, certifies the articles after the town meeting.
Nancy, you're getting close to your 2 minutes.
Okay. All right. I'll just skip to why I am running. I have trained the current staff as I was trained under Catherine Stover. I have orchestrated many and certified many town meetings and elections, both state and local. And during COVID, I've initiated new technologies in the office, new tabulator, new laser fiche, online ordering for vital records and publicly viewed archives. And I have extensive experience in all those things. And I want to ensure continuity of knowledge for the public. I'm sorry if I went over. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Robert, and I'm going to try Wickowski. How close am I?
Thank you. That's correct. Hi, my name is Robert Wickowski, and it's an honor to be nominated as a candidate for Nantucket Town Clerk. One of the most important duties of the office is to oversee and ensure that all and county elections are conducted fairly and freely in accordance with the law. I'm running to be Nantucket's next town clerk because I want to ensure that the office is never again an obstruction to the open enrollment of eligible candidates. As you may know, in 2020, I pulled my nomination papers for the office of Nantucket Register of Probate. And when I received my papers from the Nantucket Town Clerk, they had the incomplete address. Although I had more than the necessary signatures, my nomination papers were rejected by the Secretary of the Commonwealth because of the incomplete address. And as a result, none of the registered voters who had their candidate on the ballot. As a result, I filed a civil action in the Nantucket Superior Court against the Secretary of the Commonwealth, the Election Division, and Nancy Holmes in her capacity as town clerk. And ultimately, I was denied a place on the ballot. However, I'm happy to report that the Secretary of the Commonwealth took action and directly addressed the issue I raised in my suit, and thankfully eliminated that issue for future candidates. In my 17 years as a Nantucket resident, working as a lawyer from my office at 18 Broad Street, I've proven my abilities to work with hundreds of members of the Nantucket community in varying and often difficult legal matters. As town clerk, I promise to work hard to foster the participation of greater numbers of Nantucketers to run for local office, because they're essential to the growth of democracy and the future of Nantucket as a whole. I look forward to the opportunity to serve the great people of Nantucket with honor and professionalism. Thank you.
Robert, thank you. At this point, I'm going to ask Josh Bowling to ask Robert the first question, and you'll have a minute to respond.
Actually, Lee, I believe that the questions as we're proposing are to each of the candidates. It's the same question to each.
Okay, but Robert will go first.
Robert can go first. Excellent. So the question is the town clerk's office being run efficiently? And what steps would you take, Robert or Nancy, do you plan to take or hope to take to improve the user experience of the office?
Thank you, Josh. And Nancy, he'll repeat it if necessary, but I think it's a very straightforward question. Robert, you.
Thank you. Since I have not been in the office, I don't think it's fair to make an assessment of how it is run. I think that is something that while in office, I would immediately take a fiscal as well as a structural assessment of the office. In terms of efficiency, I would like to see a greater use of internet resources as well as the local media to express the messages of the town clerk. I believe that would be a better facilitated by my position as town clerk.
Thank you. Nancy.
Okay, thank you. I do have several things that I think could make the town clerk's office more efficient that I would like to address, but I would also like to address what Mr. Wickowski stated, because I believe that is a direct accusation against the accuracy of the office. And I would just like to respond to that and point out that I think it's a very maligned reason to be running for town clerk, simply sort of a personal vendetta. Mr. Wickowski turned in his papers on the very last day that they were due. All his signatures were certified. He held the papers for 7 weeks. Then he waited for almost 2 more weeks to turn them into the state on nearly the last day they were due. The state sent him a letter telling him that the reason that his signatures weren't accepted, which he claimed to have never received. Then he filed a complaint against the Elections Division and myself, as he mentioned, which was denied by both the Elections Division when he asked to be reinstated and by a Superior Court judge. Mr. Wickowski claims, which I vehemently deny, that he asked me on the street to correct the address on his papers, which was missing the word Nantucket. Both the State Elections Division and the Superior Court judge said that was his responsibility to have finished completing. I never denied that I wrote his street address on it. I vehemently deny that he asked me on the street, and why would I correct his papers when he had them himself? So what he's saying is, I know there was a problem and I did not fix it, which is what the judge said to him. And I feel I have to clear the air because that is not only my name, that's the name of my office. What I would like to do to improve the office is to continue my assistant certification. She starts the program this summer. The New England Municipal Clerks Institute. She's starting 2 years late because of COVID. She already has extensive election experience. I'd like to expand the online archive, which was named in Catherine Stover's honor, and the online portion started under my tenure. I'd like to
Nancy, a minute goes by very quickly.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Chantal, your turn. And in rotation, if Nancy will get the chance to go first. Chantal?
Thank you. And just a quick correction. My last name is Blaise Murphy. You told us to correct you if you got our name wrong. So,
Okay, but I thought I introduced you as Blaise Murphy. If I didn't, I apologize.
that is okay. I do have a fairly long, complicated one, so I totally understand. I have a pretty short and sweet question for both of you, and thank you so much for your time today. I'd love to know what aspect of the town clerk's role do you see as the most important part of what that office upholds and stands for?
Nancy?
Okay, I think there's dual roles that are most important, two different areas that are most important for a town clerk's office. And there are so many, there's almost 300 statutory duties for a Massachusetts town clerk, but I think the most important two things are the proper maintenance of vital records. People's birth, death, and marriage are just that. They're vitally important to their lives. There's rules around who can get them, how they're corrected, and they must be properly maintained and stored. They're so important, as well as the town records. And then the other thing equally as important is the orchestration of elections, town meetings, the voter records, and the census records.
Thank you, Nancy. Robert?
I believe there's been a breakdown of the format. If I could respond to the comments of Mrs. Holmes, I don't believe I've had an opportunity.
Robert, you have 1 minute, and we also have, after the question from the audience, you have another minute for a recap.
Thank you, sir. I just want to express that this isn't a personal vendetta against Mrs. Holmes. I believe that the office needs to be run more efficiently in terms of facilitating the open election process. If Ms. Holmes takes that personal, I apologize, because my hope is to better the town of Nantucket through the office. I believe that the clerk's operation and oversight of fair elections is essential to the position of town clerk, and I will give that the greatest priority because we need to have more participation in our community, and we need more voters to feel that they will be allowed and eligible to be candidates for a public office. And that will be my thrust of my position of town clerk, to make sure that all elections are run fairly and freely. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. According to the schedule, the one that's been circulated widely, it is now an opportunity for members of the public, those who are attending, which right now the count is 42 attendees. That's excellent. If you click on the button to raise your hand, your name will go to the top of the list and I'll call on you. If you have a question for Robert or Nancy, Ms. Holmes and Mr. Wickowski, raise your hand, please. Now, I don't want to be so quick that I cut off anybody, but right at the moment, I don't see any raised hands. Yes, Rick Atherton. Rick, you have a question for whom? Ryan will be unmuting your microphone in a second.
I saw that. Am I live?
You are now.
Great. Just a comment and sort of maybe a response from both candidates. I think one of the important jobs for informing the public about campaign endeavors of all candidates, they are required to file campaign finance reports, I think each one 4 times a year. And it would be helpful to hear from each of the candidates on how they reflect on the requirements of the holder of the office to help make those documents available to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Who goes first next? I think it's Robert.
Well, thank you. In terms of this election, there's one filing requirement that is due on Monday. But if in general, those records are publicly available online through the OFPCF, and they are publicly available through the town as well. So there is access to those. In terms of greater access, I think that could easily be promoted through the town's website with links associated. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Nancy, response to Rick Atherton?
Okay. The state actually only keeps on their website state candidates, but the town candidate campaign finance forms are currently on the town website. I know Mr. Atherton has asked about those in the past, and at times the information there has been a little bit dated. I checked about a year ago, and we still had campaign finance forms that were on there from candidates that were on the select board 20 years ago. So what needs to be on there? Campaign finance forms are retained for 6 years. The December after the 6th year, that is the records retention for them. Anybody who has spent or received over $1,000, they're always public records, whether anybody has spent anything or not. But if they've spent or received over $1,000, it's supposed to be on the web page, and it is. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no additional questions. We thank Rick Atherton for his. And closing statements, I think, Nancy, it's your turn to go first.
Okay. I would just, in closing, I would just like to state the reasons really that I'm running again for town clerk. And I would just like to also add in the point that while it is very sad that Mr. Wickowski was not able to be on the ballot for Register of Probate, I have had no complaints from any candidates in 14 years about access to free and fair elections or any citizens. I'm running because I care about the continuity of the office and I care about the public service of the office. I think it's very important that the next person who comes after me is trained in the proprietorial knowledge of the state programs that we use and also the internal town programs that we use. And I feel that I'm the person to bring that forward, and I'm already in the process of preparing my assistant when the time comes, that I will be gone, for whoever the next clerk may be. I think it's very important to serve the public, and it's very important to me that the continuity of the office is continued for the townspeople of Nantucket.
Thank you, Nancy. Robert.
Thank you. First, I want to thank all of those who have given their time and support to make my nomination possible. As Nantucket Town Clerk, I promise to make every effort to promote the community's need for more Nantucketers to run for local office. Greater participation in the electoral process is essential to the growth of our democracy and the future of Nantucket as a whole. In my 17 years as a Nantucket resident, I have proven my ability as a lawyer to work with hundreds of members of the Nantucket community in tackling difficult legal issues. As Nantucket Town Clerk, I'm excited to get to work on improving our electoral process, and I look forward to serving the wonderful people of Nantucket with honor and professionalism. Thank you.
Robert Wickowski, thank you for your interest and efforts. We're now going to turn to the next set of candidates who are for the Historic District Commission. And we have Abigail Camp. I'm just double checking. Is Stephen Welch here? Yes, he is. I see you, Stephen. And is John Mclaughlin? Yes, he's here as well. Okay, we're good to go. And once again, we'll start in alphabetical order, and then we will be rotating as to who it is that goes first. Abigail Camp, alphabetically, you're number one. Your
Thank
2-minute
you.
introductory statement, please.
Thank you for doing this, and I'm very happy to be here. My opening statement, you mean the 2-minute thing?
Yes.
Okay, so the most important thing to me about being on the HDC is keeping the 2 historic districts as close to their original architecture and surrounds as possible. Additive massing should be in scale and it's subordinate to the historic structure. Landscapes should be simple and hardscaping kept to a minimum. Outside the historic districts, the same rules apply, given that the whole island is a national historic landmark, and appropriate scale and context are important to preserve. Designing especially fragile areas such as our coastal neighborhoods like Cisco, Nantucket, Hulbert, but also inland ponds and marsh areas. No news to anybody, we're in the midst of an enormous building boom and high real estate market. On top of dealing with an enormous insurmountable amount of applications, we find homes designed lot line to lot line with extreme grade changes and zealous amounts of hardscaping. The board and our staff are overwhelmed. We spend over 11 hours per week in session, but also must review each project prior to meeting, and it's a big commitment. It is all possible, what makes it possible is that our board, including our alternates, especially our alternates, have patience to hear each applicant sensitively and thoroughly, and as a board member, we give most we have sorry, I lost my last the board and our staff are overwhelmed. Sorry. I wanted to say, I lost my last card there, that what I like about the HDC is the way we work together as a whole. We have different points of views, but we honor and respect each other. And that is the way we're going to get through these masses of applications, is by taking each one individually and looking at them thoroughly and sensitively. And I very much enjoy being a part of the HDC. Thank you.
Abby Camp, thank you. John Mclaughlin. And by the way, John, I say John Mclaughlin, do you, or do you say Mclaughlin? You're on the participants list.
Yeah, okay, can you hear me?
We can now. Hey, John.
I'm no expert on this. I'm over 85, so, I have to slow down and think. Thank you. you want to ask me questions, I would like to answer them if you have them from the public. No problem. Whatever you want to do.
I want you to make an opening statement. Tell us who you are. Tell us why you're running.
Okay, fine, thank you. I appreciate the support of the public over the years. That's one of my statements. And I've been on the commission.
Stop
roughly-
writing on your face. It's stupid. You're not going to get a job if this shit.
Somebody's TV or radio is running. If it's yours, please go on mute.
No, it's I'm trying to think of what to explain why all these years that I've been on here, and as an opening statement. And I've always felt in my life growing up here on Nantucket to help others, no matter what. You help others. Everybody has problems, and some people can help others do their problems, and some can't. And it's hard to think of what to say. I've known about everybody on the island over the course of the last 80 odd years, and there's a lot of good people on this island, and that's what I like. If somebody has a problem, you go to them, or they come to you and they ask questions, and you do what you can to help them. And I've been doing it for years, and I'd like to do, if I get reelected, I hope so, and it'll be my last term. So that'll be, I've done my share, but a lot of nice people are here on this island, and that's the ones that I support. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Very kind. Stephen Welch.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. And hey to John and Abby. I'll start by sharing a little bit about myself. I lived on the island full time for more than 34 years. I arrived with a friend back in the mid-'80s. We immediately fell in love with the island and worked to become part of the island life. During my time here, I founded a successful company providing community management, consulting, and design build services. When I was an active builder, I was involved in the design of over 40 homes. The homes and the property within which they are located embody the massing and architectural elements of Nantucket's past, including iconic shell paths as ensconce it. The designs of the homes and the property itself won a national award. Vocationally in college, I trained in architecture. That foundation, my company's prior business, and my training at the HDC for the last 6 years as an associate member have formed a Nantucket-centric design aesthetic. My aesthetic is rounded out with decades of practical expertise in construction with various professional trade licenses. According to other commissioners, they find my comments insightful and a useful resource determining of what is proposed, how it can be made to conform to HDC requirements. I think the biggest issue facing the HDC is approaching its work the same way over and over and expecting a different result. While we'll all agree protection is required for our historic downtown and ensconced areas, our rural areas, and our historically significant structures, the HDC has not evolved to meet the rapid rate of house moves, nor pressure on the preservation of historic homes, nor the density of new homes. This is evident just looking around. I believe procedures and policies can and should be developed to establish best practices. Our solar guidelines require thoughtful application. Wherever appropriate, energy resiliency should become a part of Nantucket's new history, a continuation of our storied character, with integrated installations providing a viable path for this goal. Protecting and preserving our historic identity is of the utmost importance, but saying it is different than doing it. It takes more than arriving at a meeting and a half once a week to address the HDC and Nantucket's needs. I know this is not intended to be pointed or finger pointing. It's simply the reality of our current circumstance. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. As we turn to the questions, let me make a moderator's comment. I know that we're supposed to hold things to 2 minutes or 1 minute, and I'm trying to adhere to that. But I'll be honest, I don't have a secondhand stopwatch, nor did I think it necessary, because I believe our candidates deserve the full opportunity to express themselves. So with that, Josh, if you would like to start with John Mclaughlin.
Will do. And again, this is a question for each of the candidates, so whatever order we're going in.
Right.
Should the HDC be more tolerant of renewable energy proposals outside the core historic districts? Specifically, should it update and or loosen its guidelines on rooftop solar arrays?
Thank you, Josh. John, it's to you.
That's a complicated question. Say that again about the outside the old historic districts area.
Renewable energy projects, John, solar arrays, windmills, those kind of things.
I've got a computer almost as old as me. I'm not receiving the question fully. I just want to ask him to speak. Ask it again and speak slowly if he could.
Sure.
Get it.
Should the Historic District Commission, John, be more tolerant of renewable energy projects like solar or wind outside the old historic districts?
Yeah. What do I feel about it? I think it's some of those projects that are coming up. There's new inventions, you know. They tie in outside of the old historic districts area because there's a lot out there now. There's all new stuff coming in, and we try to keep the old stuff in the old area. And I'm just saying it's like what do you call it? Photovoltaic and that stuff, making electricity and that stuff. It's necessary. It's a new thing, and you have to make up your mind what is good and what's bad for Nantucket in both areas. Something that looks good in the old historic area is fine, you know, to have, but to have this new stuff coming up visibly, you know, if it's visible, and that's what the law says. So if you can see it from the street or travel away, then you have, you should look into it a little stronger on some in the old HDC areas, because that's where we're getting the request for these roofs now being done. And somehow this new modern stuff doesn't sit completely 100% with me in the old historic areas. It's I think I'd like to continue with my own thoughts on helping people with problems that I've gone through in the last so many years I've been on here. I've seen a lot of stuff come new that didn't actually crop right into the public's eye view. So that's important. Is being
John, we're using up your minute.
yes. Okay, that's fine. I'd like to stay another term and then go into retirement, and I can still do stuff on the side for other people to help them. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Stephen.
I'm going to have to ask for a quick repeat of the question, please.
No problem, Steve. Should the Historic District Commission be more tolerant of renewable energy proposals outside the core historic districts? And specifically, should it update and or loosen its guidelines regarding rooftop solar arrays?
I think it's a great question. I did speak to it in my opening that I think, oh, somebody's got some reverb there, that our solar guidelines require thoughtful application, and that it is wherever it's appropriate for energy resiliency, that we should be incorporating these installations in an integrated fashion. I think it's interesting though, should we as HDC members even be commenting on these in a public forum in advance, because it could prejudice or be deemed to be a prejudice on future applications, is an interesting thought perhaps to consider. Myself, I think broadly it's appropriate to discuss this. I think I'll give you an example. We recently had an application this last Thursday in front of us at 31 Fairgrounds Road, where the solar was completely integrated within the community. This is the 31 Fairgrounds, you're all probably aware of, is kind of an affordable housing initiative. And I was ready to vote it in at the time. I think it was completely appropriate for the location. It's not in the Old Town Historic District or in the Scots Historic District. I do believe that in the exterior areas, which are of the island, the other areas of the island, which are still part of the National Historic Landmark, we do need to be sensitive to be having these on the front of buildings until the Tesla integrated solar shingle comes out and we have a sample in the office to review. So I see a bright future for the island with solar, and I'd like to see individual wind applications. It'll be interesting to see how we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Abby?
Yeah, hi. Right. Well, so I was trying to think of the first time we ever got a solar application in front of us, and I'm guessing about 10 years ago. And I don't think we were, I think we were pretty hard on those applications, but I think we've progressed a lot. And what Stephen was referring to on that application we had just the other day, within its own boundaries, it was a sort of a small development someone's doing on island, and it was enclosed. And I was actually thinking that was a positive thing as well. Of course, this is outside the historic district, and we also have had, we've seen the new Tesla shingles, and I really want to get one of those up on a roof so we can see that. And I think we could progress forward with that in many other areas if that works. Because that will read more like one of our asphalt roofs. So I think we've made progress. I don't know exactly how we will proceed in the historic district, because we have trouble agreeing on the asphalt shingles there. So I think, you know, we're moving forward, and I'm positive about the future.
Thank you, Abby.
Thank you.
Chantal, your question.
Thank you. Is there a way to make the HDC more efficient due to the large number of applications reviewed annually?
And we're going to start with Stephen.
Okay, hey, thanks, Chantal. I believe so. I think it's imperative that we do so. We're kind of looking at the trees instead of the forest, and I think it's a disservice to the island of Nantucket, the historic landmark, and our community members. I'll give you an example. I, as an associate member, as opposed to an elected member, proposed the organizational focus committee. And what we did there was we systematized the application process for roof shingles, fences, HVAC systems by establishing commissioner approved, reviewed and approved guidelines that allowed us to take literally hundreds and hundreds of hours, if not thousands of hours annually off the table by, in a sense, establishing the guidelines under which particular items can appropriately be pre-approved, subject to meeting the guidelines and the requirements. And as a result, we've been able to focus on more important things, but we've got so much more work to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I believe it's Abby's turn.
Yeah, I agree with Stephen, and I thank Stephen for his work, and also our what do you call them? Our colleague on the board, Val Oliver. They have put a lot of work in, extra hours already beyond the call of duty, and they have been putting applications on consent, so we don't have as many applications. But I do have to give credit to my board also that that we seem, even though we have so many in front of us, we give our whole attention to each application as it comes up. We don't because one's bigger than the other. We really are quite democratic about it. And I don't know, reviewing the applications before we get to the meeting has really helped things move along, so that we know how we think, and our you know, what our criticisms of the application are, we know them in advance. But we are, I would say, 100 applications behind, but I give my board credit, whoever is on each application, that we are sensitive to each one individually. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. John, you get the last word on this particular question. How would you make HDC more efficient?
More efficient is to, yes, I think you should have more meetings by the commission itself and start a new guidebook. You gotta have something to pick up some of this modern stuff if it's suitable, and if it's not, you just gotta cast it aside and say, no, it's not applicable on certain applications where some are applicable. So I would say that it needs to together and rewrite some kind of regulations in what we have. We have a guidebook, an old. I think we should look towards the future and step away from personal taste when you're working on applications by all boards in the town. They should be more studious in their opinions and not use your own opinions if you have a guideline. A guideline is a very helpful application and it saves a lot of time for the board on some of its works. And I think we should continue researching further helpful thoughts on new stuff that's coming out. Now, I'll just say the meeting the other night, they come out with a new thing. I've never seen one before in my life. It's a carport. And it has three sides are open and the back is, and it has a slanting roof on top. And I hope they put that in the paper and let people know what's going on, because that's one of the things that I don't think Nantucket needs. It's all metal, apparently. It's just not.
Right. Thank you, John. As we move to closing statements for the HDC candidates, let me remind attendees that if you've got a question for any or all of these three candidates, use the electronic raise your hand at the bottom of your screen, and I'll be able to see and call on you. But let's begin with the summary statement. Abby Camp, you begin, please.
Sorry, I don't really have a summary thing, but on that last question, I would like to say that we to move things faster, as to Chantal's question, that if our administration, who does put things on consent, were stronger, if our staff were stronger, if we had more help in the office before we get to the meeting, it would be extremely helpful. But again, my mission is to keep the historic architecture as close to the original as possible. And
housing and workers, while local businesses and town government struggle to provide.
Somebody needs to mute their microphone, please.
Well, so that's my closing statement. Thank you.
Okay. John Mclaughlin.
Yes, sir.
John, I see a great image of your ceiling. Is your camera on?
No, I'm trying to pick it up with this crazy computer I have, but anyway.
Okay, well, we can hear you. Keep speaking.
What was your question?
It's your final statement.
I'm sorry, she's not receiving that. Say it one more time.
You get an opportunity to have a closing statement. You get an opportunity to summarize your thoughts.
My closing statement, yes. Mine, I believe that if and when I get re-elected, I'd like to finish another term and saying I've done my best I could for the people in Nantucket. And in decisions to help people get something approved in a more efficient manner. It's just the way I feel that way. I would continue the way I have, and any new things, new items, I'm willing to tackle them for the public. Thank you.
That's great, John. Thank you. Stephen, closing statement.
Sure. I'd like to thank the Nantucket Civic League for this event and everyone who's attended. As we know, Nantucket is a well-rounded treasure. I'd make a couple of quick comments. I guess I'd like to clarify, at least from my own perspective, that the goal of best practices is not to speed along applications in and of them for the sake of speed. It's to make for more effective, while being efficient processing. So we don't miss things like retaining walls that are very tall, that are cropping up around the island, or you may have seen one or two new houses on a hill that don't fit in the rural areas. So for me, it's about effectiveness, and speed will come of that, but that's not the end goal, except for to get to the forest, which is, for instance, at my request, we've had a demo move-off policy, for homes on our agenda for the last year and a half. So that's an example of the forest being missed. My actual closing statement, I'll be brief, is that I'm asking for your vote if you think the HCC needs to evolve to meet and address Nantucket's preservation needs and to help plan for its future. I've been told I bring necessary skills and energy to the table. As an elected member, I'd have a seat to implement these and other initiatives. If elected, I'll bring a strong voice for fair and even measures and consistency that serves the HCC's mission in our community. And last, I just say that becoming established here on island, participating in our community, working alongside and learning from so many, it's been a privilege. And this includes my colleagues at the HDC, so thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I will remind attendees that they are welcome to pose a question. To do so, go to the bottom of your screen and click on raise hand. And I will be able to see that your hand is raised, and I'll ask our technical specialist to make your microphone go live. I have a question from Leslie Forbes.
Hello. Coastal resiliency is on many minds these days, given our coastal resiliency plan. It's very tricky in historic districts, old historic districts particularly, but it applies to many parts of the island, our concerns. And I wondered what you would see, how you would see the HDC tackling this problem when people come to you with a renovation or a new building that clearly should be taking storm surge, coastal resiliency into account, but there's nothing in the HDC enabling legislation about that, as far as I know.
Well, Leslie, I'm going to assume that you want each of the candidates to spend a few seconds on that.
Good assumption. Good assumption.
John Mclaughlin, coastal resiliency, should it affect your decision on structures that are near the water?
I'm going to rephrase that. I think the resiliency is a good thing to have, because it's getting these houses, they're raising them up in the air if they're stuck. And it's important to save houses, not to destroy them. And every time a house comes in, they say they want to destroy it and rebuild. And I always tell them it's better to move it than to lose it. And we've lost too many of the old houses in the old historic areas because of the questions that people want these things. They've got so much money to replace them. And it's a shame to see it happen to these old houses that we have. The thing to do is say, look, if you want to keep the house, fix it up. Fix it up. Don't leave it on the open burner for other. There should be one solid line for replacement of houses. Now we should sit down and discuss that ourselves and make a solid policy. Right now, it's just I want to remove it. So we're sitting there and basically we're saying, well, it's old. It's not that old in my mind. You got to save these things. So we should definitely make a statement of that, especially when you're down in the waterfront areas. where everything's going up in the air, houses are going up, you got 5 foot, 6 foot cellars sticking out of the ground. It's not appropriate for Nantucket. That's my comment.
Thank you, John. Stephen,
Thanks, Lee. So actually, this is one of the areas, this is a great example of best practices where you can take a very sensitive subject, provide guidelines, establish not only the procedures by which, I'm not sure who's staticky, but somebody's got it going on. Establish procedures whereby an applicant knows what the goalposts are and can therefore meet them and provide for productive meeting time. We actually have policies and procedures in place. We have a multi-page document. As the chair of the Organizational Focus Committee, I endorsed a letter through our preservation planner, Holly Backus. That document was developed through a consultant after many hours on their part, many hours on the part of the HDC and the Nantucket Historic Commission involvement. So it's a well-rounded document. It provides for both FEMA compliant construction, which is to say in order to qualify for insurance and meet the building code. And it also provides for wet construction, which is to say construction that puts a historic structure, which is entitled to a waiver from these FEMA requirements in some instances. It allows those to be built, rebuilt largely as they are, but with protections in place. Yeah, generally, best practices are a way to go, and that's a great example of one.
Stephen, thank you. Abby,
Oh, hi. So yes,
coastal resilience is the question.
right. So we do work a lot down on Hulbert Avenue, and if you change your foundation, you have to raise it. It comes out to 4, sometimes 5 feet in the air. And as Stephen was talking about, the one that Holly Backus was part of, so it's how to obscure that foundation so that the houses still look historic, and the water, in case of flooding, will go right under the house. So it's not new to Nantucket, this type of architecture, because it's always been this way, that there have been times when Easton Street has flooded, and a lot of the houses are already up, have large foundations. But another way I think we could be more resilient is if Concom had more teeth. I mean, there are applications come before us that you would never think could be a buildable lot, and yet they come before us. And I think if Concom were to see these and investigate these sites, they might never come to us for building because they would be deemed non-buildable. It's the ponds and the marshes are rising as well. It's not just the coasts. So if you dig down far enough, you're going to find some water in some cases. So that's what I have to say about that. Oh, Lou, I think you're muted. Lee, sorry, it's Lee.
I have a creaky chair, and so I've been muting in between time. Thank you, Abby. We've got one more question from Rick Atherton. And Rick, after you pose your question, we'll turn to Stephen in this rotation.
Thanks, Lee. I like to ask this question every opportunity with the HDC candidates. The Rural Road Guidelines were adopted many years ago, and I would like to hear from the candidates on whether they still feel those are applicable and you use them or intend to use them as you approach applications from properties impacted in the rural areas. Thank you.
All right. Let's see, I think it's Stephen's turn to start.
Sure.
Regular guidelines for the rural area.
Okay. Rick, I was waiting for you to ask what flavor ice cream we all liked, but I guess not this time around. The rural roads areas guidelines are and should be followed. I do believe that there is room for updates, and there are ways to implement them more effectively than they are now. There are, as I mentioned earlier in my closing, you will see there are perhaps a few too many homes too high on a hill. And I think that that's a problem. I'm not suggesting you can't build on a hill, but I think it needs to be done sensitively. It needs to be done in an area that is appropriate, and which is to say that it's not visible from a streetway, and that there are measures that can be taken, including as are outlined within the rural areas guidelines, to mitigate and minimize the presence of such structures. This is terribly more important than it was, say, 10 or 15 years ago, because as we all know, homes are getting much larger. There are useful applications of additive massing, spread first floor living, additions towards the rear of the structure, and other types of techniques that could be utilized, including step structures versus the trend, which is one-story living. So yes, I think we need to be using those more consistently. Thank you.
Stephen, thank you. Abby, rural area guidelines.
Oh, I think he was referring to the whether our building with Nantucket in mind is still relevant. Was that?
Rick, is that a correct interpretation, or is there a separate set of guidelines for the rural areas?
It's actually our only guideline at the. I mean, no, we have accessories like we do have guidelines for solar and outside the building with Nantucket in mind, and we have other. But that book. I mean, I read that before I came on, just to remind me of all the things that why I want to be on the HDC. And it still is a very relevant book. And I wish that when people bought a house here, they just got handed out, because it's so full of information and so sensitive the way we should be building on Nantucket. And I wish it were, you know, the copyright is probably expired, but it does need to be updated, especially in I wish solar was a part of it, and it's, you know, there are other things that we could update it with, but it still is our Bible. So,
okay,
so to speak.
John Mclaughlin, last word. Rick and Leslie, you both raised your hands, but we're running out of time. John first.
Sure. What is the question?
John, I think the question had to do with guidance for building in the rural areas of Nantucket.
Okay. Yes, you can bend a little on some things because of our regulations. And our basic regulations still bounce back to the old guidebook a lot of times. I'll say 60% of the time. Request for certain projects. And they should be allowed to have, and I'm not afraid to speak out about them. I never will be. And I just think we'll have another guidebook written eventually within, say, 2 to 3 years. They had a nice guidebook in the old area, and that's fine. Now everything expanded out to trophy homes out in the hills, up on top of hills, no matter where you go. You see these big trophy houses up there. You have a right to have a home, but don't overdo it. That's what I say. It's better to repair it than to move it. But you don't lose the old house. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Leslie, you still have your hand up. Is it a quickie? Ryan, we need to give a microphone to Leslie Forbes.
It is a quickie. You can decide whether you want to take the time or not. And that is, you've all been speaking about building with Nantucket in mind, which is still relevant, but it is old. And would each of you commit to putting the rewrite on your to-do list, so at least you've been doing pieces of it, it sounds like, according to Stephen, but let's get a new Nantucket building with Nantucket in mind and get it on somebody's to-do list.
Leslie, thank you. I'm going to make a moderator's decision here. I'm going to presume that the three of you would say yes, or even amen. But I think anything greater than that is going to consume time from our next panel. Abby, John, and Stephen, if you agree, kind of raise your hand or say yes, and we'll move on. If you want to take the moment, it's yours. We are running out of time, though.
I'll be brief.
Go.
Okay, great. So great question. The Organizational Focus Committee actually took this up. We started to break these down into modules to make it, chunk it down to make it a successful process. We found that we didn't have functional membership because there wasn't time available to individual members. So the rewrite of the guidebook, I think, is important. I would subject that to the fact that that book is an incredible treasure. It has a lot of very useful information. And I believe that if many designers or applicants were to take each of those pieces to heart, which I believe a lot of them do a good job, it would make the regulatory process much more efficient. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Abby.
So yes, it could be. I do want to say that we're dealing with architecture, which I feel is an art form, and the building with Nantucket in mind is written like a novel. It's not, you have to have this amount of height and it can only be this wide. There are no concrete. It's written more like a novel. So I don't know how to get away with that. I don't know how to get away from that, sorry, to write concrete laws, but we can try, and we all need them because we need something to fall back on when we do disagree with an applicant, and it would give us more credibility, I think. So thank you.
Thank you, Abby. John,
Yes.
building with Nantucket in mind.
Yes, sir. I've never been offended to myself or to anybody to say no. A lot of people don't know how to say no. I do. If there's something wrong, you correct it, you make recommendations, make sure it comes out right. And I appreciate the support of the public to put in the last term. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And to our three candidates, Abby Camp, John Mclaughlin, and Stephen Welch, thank you for your time. We know that HDC is an important part of our community. And to the next panel, I know we've run over a few minutes, but I think the public benefited from hearing what they had to say. And so now we're going to move to the panel for select board candidates. We have 4 candidates for 2 seats: Matthew Fee, Brooke Moore, Henry Sanford, and Clifford Williams. In alphabetical order, they're going to make their 2-minute presentation, and then we will rotate with the questions first from Josh Bowling and Chantal Blaise Murphy, and then from viewers. So viewers, be prepared. Raise your hand when Josh Bowling and Chantal Blaise Murphy have had their questions answered. Let's begin with Matt Fee.
Thank you, Lee. Thanks for having me. I'll be quick and brief, hopefully. I've been at this for a while. I started in town government early 2000s, end of the 90s, beginning of 2000, through the comprehensive plan. I was co-chair of that, and in the early 2000s ran and won and spent 3 years. I took a few years off from the select board and drove my kids around to soccer games, etc. And I've returned, and this is, I believe, my 4th time on this round. I it's great to be able to be part of the town government and to help improve life for everybody. I think I have been, I started out and my campaign was, I'm not a politician. And at this point, I have to kind of admit I am at this point. I've done it a while. I have the experience, the independence, the attention to detail, the honesty, and I think the ability to speak out to people even when it's not politically popular. And I think those are all traits that I have learned, in my tenure, and I'd like to be able to continue to bring forward on the select board and for the town. I have run a successful business. I've run a business for over 40 years seasonally. I started when I was 14 down on the wharves, down at the Skipper for my dad, and have been running a bakery, seasonally and now year round since then. So I look at it from, a few different perspectives. I grew up here, and our family worked hard and piled into, too many people into a room. So I understand sort of what it's like to, start from, working class and working hard and making your way on Nantucket. It hasn't changed all that much. I think I bring that perspective and an economics degree, to the job that I think would be missed if I wasn't there. And thank you very much.
Matt, thank you. Brooke Moore, your turn, please.
Hi, everybody, and thanks to the Civic League for this event. My husband, Charlie, and I started out here as summer seasonal homeowners in 1988, and we're so through 2004. We returned in 2013 and became year-round residents. I worked, when I arrived here in 2013, I went to work as the financial manager at Nantucket Looms, where I served for 6 years, and now I'm retired. I am also a bilingual Spanish speaker. Hablo español. Throughout my life, I've prioritized giving back to my community wherever I lived. Here on Nantucket, I've served on the Affordable Housing Trust for 5 years, the Council for Human Services and Contract Review Committee for 2 years. I'm a founding member of Nantucket Equity Advocates and the Nantucket Resource Partnership. During COVID, I'm proud to have helped establish the COVID Resource Response Team, coordinated the translation of public outreach messages for both the Cottage Hospital and the town of Nantucket. I also volunteered at most of our vaccine clinics, and I've attended almost every select board meeting for 4 years. I've been thinking a lot lately about the lessons of COVID. We learned a new phrase, essential workers, as we came to better understand how much we rely on folks whose jobs couldn't be executed remotely. Contemplating who and what is essential to our life together on Nantucket is one way I frame my thinking about how I might set my priorities as a select board member. It's essential that we find a better balance between the number of residences for our workforce and our visitors, because we need one another to thrive. Protection of our environment is critical, and we must continue planning for climate change, ensuring that we make the best investments to protect critical public infrastructure and historical assets. It's essential that we support and strengthen our human services safety net to care for our neighbors in need. And I believe we can and should do more to foster a climate of equity and inclusion for all our residents and visitors, helping to elevate the voices of everyone in our government decision-making. As a select board member, I look forward to soliciting and considering a wide variety of ideas and perspectives from across our year-round and seasonal communities. Thanks so much for having me today.
Brooke, and thank you. We turn now to Henry Sanford.
Thank you, Lee. Thanks, Josh and Chantal, for being here, and everyone that decided to take this beautiful Saturday to be on their computers. My name's Henry Sanford. I've been on Nantucket my whole life, save for a little bit of college and some time, what we kind of know around here as a whaling journey. Came back in 2011 as an adult, although still a kid by many Nantucket definitions. I'm running for select board because I believe that a voice of youth and independence will strengthen the board. With the departure of Chrissy Parentella, I proudly represent myself as, an under 50 candidate who is, I will say, living the challenges of a quickly evaporating middle class value proposition on the island. We need to focus this island on how to maintain its middle class and how to attract the brain trust that are young entrepreneurs and young business owners, young workers to Nantucket, not just for the season or a few years to their economic benefit to leave, but how to keep them here long term. I am very passionate about the harbor and believe that it has taken a backseat to a lot of other priorities that are no less important, but that is what I wish to talk more about should I have your vote. Thank you so much.
Henry, thank you. Clifford Williams.
Hi, Lee, and thank you. I echo what everyone else has said. The Civic League, thank you again. I think this has been my 10th or 11th time. I'm not giving up. Unfortunately, I started this last year by saying I ran 10 years ago for the first time, somewhere around there, and the issues that were faced then are still a challenge now. So hopefully I can bring to the board some closure to these issues and just quit having so many meetings and move forward. Actually establish some sort of a timeline where we have to put closure to these issues. As far as I think the biggest ones are the town employees, retention of town employees, housing, landfill. As a resident of the town of Nantucket, I was born and raised here. My family's been here for over 300 years. So I'm not going anywhere. I haven't just talked about it. I've had citizen articles at town meeting for incineration at the landfill. I have articles in this year for affordable housing. I have a piece of property I've proposed to the town for just in town employees, not a situation like Sacham's Path where everybody can come in from anywhere. I think I'm someone of action versus just rhetoric, and hopefully I can implement that as a board member. So that's how I stand. Thank you.
Clifford, thank you. In keeping with what we did previously, Josh Balling will ask a question. It'll be one question for all four candidates. We'll start with Brooke. And when we get final word from Matt Fee on that question, Chantal Blaise Murphy will ask her question, and we'll start with Henry Sanford. So Josh, a question, and of course, Brooke will be the first respondent.
Thank you, Lee. What is your position on the select board's role in protecting Wisconsin Bluff? Is there room for compromise with the Conservation Commission in the interest of looking at the bigger picture as it pertains to sea level rise and coastal resilience?
Thanks, Josh, for that question. So position on Sconset Bluff, I believe the select board has already taken a position in executing the memorandum of understanding with regard to a path forward on the moving of Baxter Road. I do think that the Sconset Bluff and Geotube project is the example from which we learn how to do this better going forward as a community. That the protection of private property, public infrastructure, the investment of public dollars, and the responsibility of the select board and the community for infrastructure. We're going to have a lot of questions about those things going forward. And I think, unfortunately, the way the Sconset Bluff situation has played out over many, many years is a lesson to us in how to get ahead of it and do it differently going forward.
Thank you, Brooke. Henry Sanford, same question.
I'd like to echo Brooke's sentiments. I think the biggest thing for me, I was naive growing up and even until recently knowing that people had to pay for access to public beaches, other places besides Nantucket. So that is kind of ingrained into what it means to be here, is to have access to the public beach. Whether there's compromise, it's the job of leaders to bring these entrenched parties to a table, to a place where they feel they have the safety to discuss a compromise. If they're scared of losing face or whatever. I think that we need to look at this as how do we create a flexible matrix going forward for all coastal resiliency efforts. I mean, they're so different from Nantucket to the North Shore and the hard armoring. Are we looking at new ideas, I think, to solve the issue that works in favor of both parties, not being so much one way or the other. I don't like to see taxpayers foot a large bill for moving a road. I think that's kind of hopefully a last ditch effort. But I think over on Sheep Pond Road, there was a great not compromise, but partnership with the Conservation Foundation, where they were able to relocate and plan it out, and Sheep Pond Road became inaccessible, and they are now going to relocate the road through a cooperative public-private effort versus a contentious one. So I'd like to see more of that.
Thank you, Henry. Clifford.
Yes, this is just one of these issues that I was on the finance committee for 9 years. These are one of the issues we faced with relocating Baxter Road or any other road that we lose through erosion. These issues drive me a little crazy. I would just get right to the point. I mean, you either armor these type situations or you don't. And I'd just move on in that direction. I'd let town meeting vote for a lot of this stuff. I know we had the article where town meeting has to vote for the long-term leases in conjunction with the geotubes and whatever takes place. So I think town meeting should just vote and be given the information they need to make these judgments and move on. I think we have bigger issues. Like I said, town employees, the landfill, these things drive me crazy when they drag on for decades.
Thank you, Clifford. Matt Fee.
Yeah, I think this is a little more nuanced than, and you're electing us to, you're electing the select board to do all the research, to look at all the different sides and try to come up with something that's fair and that works. I think that we've tried to do that here. I think we have done that. I think that there's a lot of hurt feelings still between the Concom and the and SBPF. I think SBPF feels as though they had some, some expectations that haven't been filled. I think there's some expectations the town had of Concom had of them that hasn't been filled, and it feels a lot of times to me like a broken marriage that needs some counseling, and so then you think, oh, is it only going to be there? We've been working there 40 years and we're at this point. This is, like Brooke said, this is an example of what will we have to do elsewhere. Everyone has their own personal interest. Everyone is trying to, sort of to get through, save their house or not pay for it, have someone else pay for it. I think that we've got a very difficult road ahead. And I look at this as as an example of doing it well. If we can work our way through this, and I'm not going to say I haven't been discouraged at times, because I have, but we've met with everybody. We've met with the Concom. We've met with the landowners. The deals that were in place before are still there. And I think we're taking the right position. We're not usurping the power of the Concom. They still have their role, which will happen when these applications are placed. I think it's the state hasn't caught up with the state rules on road relocations, et cetera, haven't caught up with the realities of climate change. And they will over time. Sheep's Pond it's cooperative now, but there was a lawsuit. They didn't want to better it. They didn't want to pay betterments. The court said they didn't have to. And so we have to take into those types of facts into consideration on how best to move forward on Baxter Road. And I think we've struck a fair and good balance. There'll be access there. The town, if it goes the way we've asked, the town won't pay for it, and we'll have help getting sand, from SBPF. And, I think that they're in their connections in government on the state and national level. Sand, when you look at what's going to happen on Code 2, et cetera, everything is going to require a lot of sand, and that is part of the MOU. There's a lot more to it than just that, but I think, I hope that we move this forward over the next year or so, and I hope that, my discouragement turns the other way. So, thank you.
Matt, thank you. Chantal Blaise Murphy, your turn for a question, please.
Thank you. Nantucket has grown to become quite a diverse community. It's certainly changed significantly since I moved here 17 years ago as a full-time year-round resident. However, involvement at meetings, select board, town meetings, and even elections certainly don't reflect that. And I'd like to know, how do you plan to involve a more diverse audience in the decision-making process of the town?
Right. I think it's a very wise and very great question. And we begin with Henry Sanford.
I'm so glad I got this question. So I think that public service is something that is very important to me, but it doesn't go past that. It really is only available to people with certain amounts of time. And I get this question all the time. You own a business, you're, in your 30s and you have got 2 kids, one on the way. How are you going to do this? And I'm lucky that I work for myself, but I think that one thing that we should really look at are some maybe compensation packages based on income levels for people who want to run for office. We don't pay really any of our decision makers, and we're getting to the position where we should at least start looking at how to incentivize people to give up maybe that second job or that third job that they normally might have to hold to participate in the public process. So I think that we should really look at how we're compensating our leaders, what the incentives are to join into the public process, and try to reach out to, I would really like to see younger people involved in the issue. And this is, just again, something that's close to me, because last year at town meeting, a Saturday, and everyone says, oh, it's a Saturday. It says, well, as far as I realized, a Saturday is a working day. And towards the end of the meeting, you could just see it, the demographics shifted. So I'd really like to avoid that and try to, do things like having meetings that are more better available times, but also I think, again, compensation has to be considered. Nantucket is a difficult place for people to live, and to expect that just anyone can give their time is a bit naive without, being compensated for it. So that is what I would do.
Thank you, Henry. Clifford Williams, how do we engage more diverse population members?
Well, I think that's a great point as part of a simulation. If I've got this question right, you're trying to ask me how the Hispanic or Black or different communities that have come into Nantucket are going to participate. Is it correct with that?
Chantal, do you want to respond to Clifford with an illumination, further explanation?
Of course, I'll repeat the last portion of the question. How do you plan to involve a more diverse audience in the decision-making process in our town?
Thank you.
Okay, so I believe I'm correct. I think that's a big a point, especially here in New England, where we have town government, where we have a town meeting versus a mayor or city council, where the community doesn't get as involved. And unfortunately, I think that's something people have to learn when they assimilate into the community, if they're new to the community, that everything isn't free. And I think there's 300 people that donate their time to the town for no pay. And it requires a lot. It takes educating that portion of the community that participation is very important, but I can't drag people over here to participate. So I think part of the assimilation into the community is a great part of that. So they have to learn that all these things are done by volunteers, and it's a great amount of time spent, and it's part of your civic duty.
Thank you, Clifford. Matt Fee.
I think the current select board has already done a great job at trying to improve it. We've hired Kamal McCarthy. He's a DEI director for the town. We've also had a lot of, thank you to Brooke, and a lot of work she's done has helped, do translations and reach out to communities, especially during COVID, but not just during COVID. It's housing, et cetera. That's all working. The other thing that I think is really working, and this came from, this was recent, and I can't take credit for it. It was Erica Mooney, but we have a talent pool now, and we keep a list of names for all the various committees. And we have seen a real increase in ages and in nationalities and in representation from that talent pool. And I think that has been very helpful. I think we need to do more and better, and we're working on that. And some of it, some of it is hard. I mean, people that are staying here are working. People, in order to stay here, are working so hard that they have to. They don't have a lot of time, and that's sort of the reality of being here. And at some point, they will have the time to donate to it. And I think when they want to do that, we have to make it possible for them. Be more welcoming and make sure people feel comfortable. I think the talent pool does that, because if you went into, some people try to run as a select board, right away as their first go round, and there's so much involved with it that you have to know that I think it's really important to serve on the finance committee, serve on other committees of the town, so that you're up to snuff when you run for the top top position. You need to know a lot of different aspects. So I think the talent pool is going to help us address what you're talking about, Chantal. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And Brooke Moore, for this question, the last word.
So first, I want to say thank you to the Civic League for the video series that you did in cooperation with the Inky Mirror about what it's like to serve, and so people can learn more about what the jobs are and what the requirements are and what different ways one can participate. I did this. The Council for Human Services didn't meet for well over 2 years. When I retired, I looked into it as a place to give my time. And I actively and proactively went into our diverse communities and recruited people to apply and join. I had several Zoom meetings. This was during COVID with different constituencies. And as a result, Council for Human Services is now clearly the most diversely represented committee or board in the town today. And I think the answer to this is a lot of things, including inviting people to participate, teaching them how our system of government works. I had a trilingual meet and greet last night on Zoom, translated into Spanish and Portuguese, which you can see online now. And a lot of the questions were about, how does our government work? How do we get involved? And I think it's teaching people who come from other cultures and government structures that they have the power to exercise their voice, to get involved and to participate and to reach out in multiple languages. I think we have to be very careful about the concept of assimilation. I know as a student who lived in Spain in high school, that speaking Spanish and understanding the complexities of governance in Spanish are two different things. And that meeting people where they are linguistically is critical to helping them understand what their rights are, where they have opportunity to participate. As I said, I founded Nantucket Equity Advocates with a group of people for this express purpose in our community. And my translation work during COVID, I mean, it took effort to advocate to make sure that our community members understood what the heck was going on in COVID in a language that they could understand. And I also think technology is coming a long way. The use of hybrid meetings and Zoom platforms so that people can go back and watch the recordings with subtitles in whatever language they speak is critical. And I think ultimately getting to the point where the hybrid format uses live interpretation, which is, we're on the cusp of having that technology available. And I think the town should budget for that to be available for, at the very least, regulatory boards and the select board. And in the meantime, I've had this idea about at least once a month, having live interpreters available for public comment in select board meetings so that community members who are not comfortable speaking up in English would have the ability to do so. So I've thought about this question a lot, and I think we have a lot of work to do. Thanks.
Thank you, Brooke. To our attending participants, if you have a question, please raise your hand. Now, 2 points. Articles 39 through 43 on short-term rentals are the subject of our very next panel. And so if you ask a question about short-term rentals, I will recognize you and then ask you to wait to the next panel. And then with an apology to our HDC members, my wife claims to keep a little book where she writes down every mistake that I made, and it's getting filled. I just made one a moment ago. I gave the summary statements the opportunity before the questions. We're going to go back to our schedule. Questions next, and when they're done, then your recapitulation, summary statement, beginning with Clifford Williams. But let's see if there are any questions. Remember, go down to the bottom, and where the icon says raise your hand, push that button. Folks. Chantal, you have a follow-up question? Is that correct?
I do, yes, thank you.
Go ahead, because no.
As
I've got one question from the attendees list. So Chantal, you first, and then Chuck Davis.
Thank you. As a young person growing up in the community, I've appreciated the old ways of Nantucket while recognizing that we are now in the future and we need to make some drastic changes in a lot of areas. And I'm curious, how do you intend to inspire stewardship to preserve and protect our cultural, historical, and natural treasures that attract visitors to the island, those visitors that we so heavily rely on, while also maintaining the island that us locals and natives call home?
All right. In the spirit of rotation, Clifford Williams goes next.
Well, I don't know how much more we could change. We have the HDC, we have the historical district commissions, and we do everything we can to preserve the island. It comes back to the question we just had about stewardship. I was told by Dylan Hernandez, our state representative, that the minority has now become the majority in the high school or our schools. So we have to question the direction we are going in, and it gets back to a simulation, or what direction the youth is encouraged to participate in town government and preserving the island. I'm going to be 60 pretty soon, so my son's 16. I don't know if he's going to be encouraged to stay around this island. I guess the people that just love the island are going to stay here, and hopefully they'll go forward with all the boards, well, maybe not all the boards, we'll get rid of some of them, but the outlook for the island as far as what it's been for the country since 1647 or something crazy like that till now, and we can carry on and leave a better place.
Thank you, Clifford. Matt.
This sort of, Chantal, this was what I kind of ran on 20 years ago, was basically, I used to say green is good, and it was green, not money. It was green, like taking care of the environment, taking care of the island, supporting the HDC, those types of things. The more that we did, in my mind, to keep Nantucket special and to keep Nantucket unique, the better it would do for all of us. That was sort of how we worked, consensus building on the comprehensive plan. We were working from that mindset. That's kind of how I've tried to do it, as I've been a selectman, a select board member. I think it's one thing to have those beliefs. It's another to try to implement them in all the decisions, because there's a lot of pressure on all of us to worry about the other green thing. People are making a lot of money, and sometimes not necessarily in the best interest of Nantucket. And so I think that is the push and pull that we are all facing on all these different boards. I think it has to do with staffing and having adequate staff. We heard HTC today talk about how much work they had, and Abby talk about needing staff. I think at this point, it's protection of community. I think it's housing. Everything that I look at now, some of us were warning of this, that we would get in this housing situation. Some of us have been housing our own employees for 20, 30 years because we found it necessary. I think the town is just learning, now that they're going to have to do that. And we as a community, I think all the things we want to do, protect the harbor, do better at HDC, et cetera, all require employees, run an island home. All those things require employees, which require housing. So I think that, and the other part about it, we've talked about water quality for years. Some of this is finding a way to manage and hold staff accountable so that the steps that are taken, the things that are done are the most important things, not the ones that staff wants to do, not the ones that are easy. You have to pick and hold accountable on the things that are hard sometimes, and you have to prioritize. And that's something that I try to do, and I try to get support from the board to do. And so I'd like to continue doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Brooke,
I'd
remember
like to-
that you're responding to Chantal's question. Everybody will have an opportunity for a recap statement following this.
Sure. Chantal, could you read your question again? Because I just want to make sure I understood it.
Of course. How do you intend to inspire stewardship to preserve and protect our cultural, historical, and natural treasures?
So I think we begin with education. We begin with education of our youth and our visitors so that they know what a treasure this place is. I think there's a lot of forms of stewardship. Obviously, what Mac talked about with the harbors and water quality, that stuff is really important to me. I'm a boater and a sailor, and I spend a lot of time on the water. And we do have a long and rich history here that we cherish. There's more of it than has been displayed in our visitors' places in terms of our diverse heritage. And but I think it's an educational piece. What makes Nantucket special, and how can you as an individual participate in keeping it special, protecting our environment, protecting our historic assets, and frankly, protecting our year-round community, because that is Nantucket. This is a community, a live, living, breathing community. It's not a tourist destination. Independent of that. And I think protecting that community is critical.
Thank you, Brooke. Henry. Henry, click your mute button.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you. This is the crux of my candidacy. I would hope that my election would inspire other young people to see that they can do it, that they can get involved. As an example of someone who is young, who has young children, that you can pitch in. This is what it takes to have. We all talk about a platitude of sustainability, but the sustainability comes through small actions, small pieces of work, and us all pitching in. And so, one specific solution I think that we really need to focus on are year-round housing restrictions in a conservation-minded effort. Private conservation organizations have been the most successful conservation players. We need to look to see how can we partner with the great amount of private philanthropy to solve, I think, what is a year-round community issue that I think all candidates agree on. I'm just going to bring up the harbor again because it means so much to me. The harbor once was and still can be a cyclical local economy. I don't think there's any more perfect example of us establishing those oyster beds, young guys, revitalizing a business and then selling them directly to one of the most expensive oyster bars in New England. We need to look for more opportunity propositions for young people to believe in the community, because if they don't believe that the value is here, then they'll never get involved. And we need to start building up their confidence. So that is one reason that I was asked by my peers to run. And that's, I feel very strongly about my candidacy and inspiring, showing young people they can get involved. So.
Thank you, Henry. By the way, if I lose track, somebody shout, but I think all four of you have had a chance. We have a raised hand from Chuck Davis. Ryan's our tech specialist. Ryan, could you give Chuck a microphone? I think you just have.
I think I've got it. Can you hear me, Lee?
Yes, we can.
So I've got a question for Henry, just picking up on some of his earlier comments, and it really has to do with the functioning of the select board and how that works if he's elected, given that we'd have 3 real estate brokers on the board. And so real estate matters, maybe STRs come up as they have in the previous year. And so assuming that all 3 have to recuse, then do we have a functioning board when it pertains to property real estate matters, STRs, going forward?
Thank you, Chuck. May I, if I may, I'm calling you Chuck, but Mr. Davis.
That's
fine. Henry, the question was to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chuck. I appreciate the questions. It's not one I haven't gotten before, to be honest. You know, there is precedent for other boards that have been in extenuating circumstance to this. I guess, you know, if I was forced to recuse or asked to recuse, I suppose I would. I am pro regulation. And also we need to ask all other, and not to point a finger, but it's a question that needs to be asked of every person. Can you make objective decisions about STRs if you either live next to a short-term rental or you have performed a short-term rental in your own house? And I am most obviously the real estate agent, but I haven't even looked up those other facts about the other candidates, and I'm not even sure we can answer those questions right now. But I would I'd be happy to recuse myself on short-term rentals. I would hate to see the board be held up by it. I think there's plenty of instances in mass law when they had too many potential conflicts that they all acknowledged it and moved past it. I hope that answers your question, but I think we need to ask it of every candidate, quite frankly, because we're talking about a zoning issue that implements different property rights onto everybody. So potentially, if you own a property, you're theoretically compromised.
Thank you, Henry. I believe the Scotsman said the best laid plans af gang agley. And in this case, we've got a question coming through the question and answer box. And it has to do, let me read from Allison Mitchell. What are the candidates' ideas for solutions to the current housing crisis for year-round residents and members of our workforce? I think each of you have edged onto those in one way or another. So if I could ask just very quickly, very briefly, starting with Matt, support for housing.
I think we've got to do everything we can on housing, which is, you know, we've got a housing authority and they're doing aspects. Libby is working on it now from the town side. Hopefully the unions we can find a way that the unions will support it as well, so that we have, you know, staff living on island and working at all the various departments. There's a way to do that and do it fairly. I think that we need to do more than we're doing. I think that we should be doing a nonprofit housing that is doing the building itself, and the tax credits, which are substantial, are accruing and going back to that entity to be able to do more housing. We have to find ways where it becomes not just taxpayers' dollars, but it becomes, you know, sort of, it starts to build on itself. I think what Henry talked about earlier with, you know, sort of looking at it from another angle, looking at it as housing retention is crucial, or we will lose all the existing housing that's there. I think that's really important. And it's not, and I think that, it's multifaceted. We need to be looking at it from as many different angles as possible. And I think that we understand now that it's crucial to operating our island. And I think for that reason. And the other thing I have done recently with the housing office is I've asked for what we should be utilizing every town property, not just the ones we've purchased recently, but properties like the old fire station, Silver Street parking lot. We should be utilizing every single lot that we have for town employee housing first. And I've asked for an inventory of that, and Ken Bogrand is working on that. So I think that, you know, there's a lot to do.
Thank you, Matt. Brooke Moore.
So where to begin? First of all, the community voted strongly to make sure that we invest through the Neighborhood First appropriation a few years ago, that we continue to stay in safe harbor under Chapter 40B so that we control the application process for where affordable housing is developed and how it's developed. We continue to invest in that process until we reach our 10% number, whatever it should be, will be after we get the revised census numbers in the fall. I agree that the focus on that staying in safe harbor under Chapter 40B has restricted what we've been able to invest in. We've focused on rentals because there's it's a complex issue. There's reasons to focus on rentals over home ownership in terms of a cost per unit under Chapter 40B. However, I have been part of a steering committee that is in the process of developing a community land trust. The model there is that there's an investment in the land cost to bring the housing cost down for the home purchaser. And the way it works is the land trust acquires the land with a deep subsidy and then leases it to the homeowner for 99 years, and they own the home on top of that land. And they're able to get a mortgage and have control of that house. And the way it works is you deed restrict it in a way that's similar to the covenant program, but not exactly the same, where there's an allowed appreciation over time, but that is limited and it's scaled to how incomes go up in the community, so that when that homeowner wants to sell, that unit remains affordable to a homeowner at their same income level years down the road. And we really need to deed restrict an adequate supply of housing that will only be accessible to year-round residents to solve our year-round housing shortage. Workforce housing for seasonal workers is another issue. We haven't had the time or the money to tackle that question yet, but it's another thing we need to address. And of the four candidates, I would say I probably carry the most experience and knowledge and expertise in this area. And I hope that to bring that to the select board.
Thank you, Brooke. Henry, I realize we're running over time, but I thought when I read the question, that was a critical one. And I'm hoping that voters agree with me that it's worth discussing. Henry, you're on mute.
Again, wow. Who's the millennial now? Anyhow, I believe, you know, I'll just run through a few programs to be specific. So the covenant program should look at expanding to year-round only restrictions. And when you look at what it takes for someone to buy a home in the market today versus what we are subsidizing, there's a very large gap in between. So right now we've done, I think, a great job, honestly, of putting things in the pipeline for the 150, 175% or under area median income group. What we're missing, what I've referred to a few times, is the business owners. I mean, to afford something on the market, and this is where I think my real estate experience actually can play to a huge benefit, is looking at, you know, what's available. You're kind of bumping up to 300% of area median income until you start being able to afford something on the open market. So that's a very large gap. We have between 175% and 300% of AMI, which is basically our middle class. To put those into terms, that's like 180 or something thousand for a family of four to about, you know, just under 300,000. I think it's right around there. So, you know, we need to look at deed restrictions in the way that we've been dealing with conservation restrictions. Again, public-private needs to happen. Conservation has done a great job in this respect. You know, looking at those saleable pieces of land that Matt referred to, I can immediately think of about 10 or 15 parcels that could almost pay off the entire town debt. One, Matt would have to recuse himself at 48 Cliff Road. But, you know, we are seeing a period in our marketplace right now of unprecedented pricing. And the town should cash in on that by, I think, selling some of its land and using it to finance programs that are not building programs, that don't trap us in with unions. They're finance programs that go out to businesses who maybe want to invest in housing. Maybe it's a, you know, working with the land bank to see which parcels can be bought by the town so we can give them better stewardship and then free up our tax rolls to do a little bit more creative work instead of buying and building, which presents its own issues of, you know, do people want to be there forever? I believe I've been touting a land trust model for years. I love that model. I think the Vineyard did a great job with it, and we should learn from them.
Thank you, Henry. Clifford.
Wow. Hey, I have Article 63 for giving the town the opportunity to do a public-private partnership. But I think I've found weakness in the town's philosophy to pursue someone like me. I'm not an expert on all this affordable housing, but I do have the piece of land. So I think the town should be actively pursuing individuals like me and enter into a dialogue to figure out exactly what they want to do. Whatever restrictions you want to put on it, that's fine. But I can just tell you firsthand, that's not what's been going on. So we're running out of time. I think Ken Bogran in one meeting said there's only 4% of the land we can still have to build on. Who's going to give us the land? Who's going to work with us? Well, I'm willing to work with them, but yet my article says take no action. So it's kind of confusing. Instead, I'm just a binary type guy. So I'm giving the offer and I'm finding out that that's not really the way things are working. So we need better leadership, I think, in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Clifford. Clifford mentions an article, and in the most unbiased way, I will remind our viewers that there are several articles coming up in annual town meeting having to do with either rebuilding existing structures, repairing, replacing, or buying new structures, all in the aid of housing either town employees or year-round workers. Read the Voter's Guide to Annual Town Meeting, seek them out and see whether or not they resonate with what your thinking might be. So there you are. No recommendation on how to vote, but a recommendation clearly on becoming informed. At this point, closing statements, and help me out of here. I think we're back to Matt. Yes,
No,
Matt.
Yeah, I'm here. Yep. No, I'd like to run. I'd like to get your support for another 3-year run for the select board. I think I am willing to work with anybody. I'm trying. I've shown that I'm independent. I am willing. I do my homework, and I'm willing to speak up even when it's not popular. And I think I have the experience that is needed with this, with the current makeup of our board. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Brooke Moore, closing statement.
Thanks. Sustainability. That's what I think about the most. And I know that the sustainability of this community hangs in the balance of our ability to see the needs and priorities of both our year-round community and our seasonal residents and visitors. This is an amazing and beautiful place, and on it, our lives are inextricably entwined. We have to see, hear, and understand one another in order to decide together how best to allocate and protect our limited and shared resources. I will bring my training as a social worker, mediator, and finance manager, as well as my experience as both a seasonal and year-round resident, to my work as select board. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke. Henry Sanford. One more time, Henry, mute button. There we go.
It's funny now, right? I've been brought up and lived my life with a commitment to public service and small acts. I don't believe in, grand sword in the stone solutions. I believe in the small pieces of work that need to be done. As a father of two, one on the way, as a business owner, as someone who grew up here, someone who's an adult here, this is my way of pitching in and ensuring that Nantucket is a sustainable place to live, to put in my own work. I do have a background in government, as vocational training in political science and sociology, and my knowledge of the town's history and the machinations of its government will play well. So I hope to bring a young and independent voice, and that's it.
Thank you, Henry. And Clifford, as it said on television, the last word.
There you go. I'd just like to thank the Civic League again, and you, Lee, for hosting us. Like I said earlier, I'm almost 60 years old. I've been in the aviation business almost 40 years. I'm the last guy out here at the airport, taking care of all the nav aids. Been in the building business. I developed houses off island, subdivisions. When I was younger, I helped widen the Old South Road, build catch basins when you used to do it by hand. I've been forced to be in unions. I've been to union arbitrations. But I've had articles in the town meeting for incinerator at the landfill. Shredder also to accompany that this year. I have articles in there for employee housing. So I'm just not sitting around, even though I haven't become a selectman. I'm trying to work from the outside in to challenge and hopefully solve some of these issues. I think one of the other bigger things we have is transparency and trust in our government. I was just at the Rotary Club luncheon last week when Dylan Hernandez was there. It came up about the African Meeting House and the fact that that's gone on for 4 years. I'd bring closure to that right away. We're gonna have 600 windmills offshore. I don't know why we can spend billions of dollars on windmills that obviously would proven that don't work, but we can't fix the potholes in the road. So I'd just focus on some basic issues, our employees, dealing with the unions, the proper compensation for employees that work in Nantucket, employee housing, and just make sure that it's a better future going forward, because things just aren't getting any cheaper here. And I think one of the biggest challenges is the employee housing. It needs to be addressed. So I think I have the ability to help do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Clifford. Now, folks, as we move to the final formal session, let me explain a little bit. However, let me say there is an informal session that will follow this formal one, and it's an open question and answer period. We know that there have been write-in candidates for not two positions, but 2 levels, Planning Board and Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board. And we've advised the write-in candidates that they have the opportunity to raise their hand and make a statement. That will come after this next panel. Folks, we're just slightly behind time, not too bad. You have my commitment and NCTV's commitment to stay online while there are reasonable questions. So that's to come. Now, Articles 39 through 43 have raised all kinds of interest, to the extent that we know that there are champions of both Article 42 from the town and Article 43 from Act Now. We have asked those people with strong interests to form a panel to become the questioners of our 4 candidates about short-term rentals. But by the way, before we begin that, something that I should have done a moment ago, and that's to thank Josh Balling and Chantal Blaise Murphy for their efforts on behalf of this forum on Meet the Candidates. Because we're not going to set up a whole new group. They will ask, each panelist will ask one question, and as before, the 4 candidates will respond. I'll ask them to rotate their answers so that each in turn will be the first to answer a question. Let me introduce the panelists. Kathy Baird comes from Nantucket Together. Penny Dye, who's a leader in the Nantucket Association of Real Estate Brokers and also participates in the National Nantucket Historical Association. And a lesser known but very important function for Penny is she's treasurer of Nantucket Community Sailing. Julia Lindner, executive director for Act Now. My colleague Malcolm McNabb, whom I call Dr. because he's both MD and PhD, now retired, giving of his time to our Board of Health. But you may actually see him if you go into the Whaling Museum behind the desk. Bruce Miller, former select board member, and Stephen Morey, a member of the Finance Committee and one of my colleagues on the Nantucket Civic League. So what will happen is they are in alphabetical order. We're going to ask Kathy Baird to pose one question, and then we'll go around the select board candidates. My helpmate has just brought me a cup of tea to keep me vital. Thank you, Priscilla. And so, Kathy Baird, your question, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moderator, and the Nantucket Civic League for hosting the forum today and inviting Nantucket Together to participate. I think most everybody on the panel is well known to the community. So let me just say that Nantucket Together was formed in the fall of 2020. We operate as a 100% volunteer, Section 501c4 nonprofit with our mission to support sustainable initiatives on the island. We are a community that includes visitors, part-time and year-round residents. I am the co-founder and the president of Nantucket Together. And also I serve as an appointed member of the town's advisory committee of non-voting taxpayers. And I serve as the vice president of the Tom Nevers Civic Association. My family has been visiting the island since the early 1980s, and we've been part-time residents in Tom Nevers since 1993. Now onto the question, a little background. After the debate on short-term rentals last year, Articles 39 through 42 were drafted and recommended by the Planning Board as companion articles to be considered together. Fears and rumors abound as partial information, misinformation circulates, which has been dividing and exhausting our community. I think we kind of want it to be over. So my question for each of the select board candidates is a hypothetical one. So for the sake of argument, let's assume that both 39 and 42 pass, meaning the town zoning decisions are not made in the courts. Short-term rentals are no longer permitted in apartment buildings. The planning board can now prohibit short-term rentals in workforce housing, rental developments, and other properties that need a special permit. And a regulatory framework is now in place to further regulate short-term rentals as appropriate, where a zoning bylaw cannot do that. So as a current or future select board member, you will have the ongoing authority to add additional regulations to Article 39 framework. If you could add one regulation at your first select board meeting, what would that be? And what data would you cite to base that public policy decision on?
Kathy, thank you. And I thank you also for bringing together the question in your final sentence. Matt Fee.
She's caught, that's a tough one, Kathy. Which would be the first regulatory? What I would like to see, I had looked at proposing, and I know you know this, I talked about grandfathering, not grandfathering all people that are doing it the way they're doing it, and then making it, and I think so something along those lines would be, is acceptable to me. I worry about the hypothetical, because I think you can't have zoning that is in contradiction. You can't have regulation in contradiction to zoning. So I worry that in that hypothetical that we will not have the ability to contradict, to contradict the actual zoning. And I worry that it will not be enough. But if you're saying what one thing do I think we could do, I'd say allow people that are doing it now and slow down the growth of it in the future so that we have something sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Brooke Moore.
So I'll say that the question feels a little bit like a setup to presume that both articles pass. I don't think we need Article 42 in order to build a regulatory framework. And I think we have time to build out a zoning bylaw that takes in more information and that we learned through the regulatory framework that would be created under Article 39. So it is my position that we should, at the very least, protect the right of year-round residents to short-term rent their properties. I would like to see restrictions on, the way I would describe it is properties that are never used by their owners for personal use, strictly investment properties, unless perhaps owned by someone who lives on Nantucket. And I'm not sure we understand the intersection of the zoning bylaw and the regulatory bylaw. And as Matt pointed out, the prioritization or which takes priority in terms of can you regulate over the zoning bylaw if it's passed as broadly a right, protected right for short-term rentals as is proposed in Article 42. So I would advocate for building a regulatory framework first, understanding the different needs of people who operate in the short-term rental market, and build a structure of limitations under zoning that makes sense for the future of Nantucket.
Thank you, Brooke. Henry.
I do believe in the strength of the bylaw, because that is what the state intended when it passed short-term rental regulations in 2018. That is exactly why we are able to craft Article 39, because it's in consistency with those state regulations. So the first thing I would do is to suggest a moratorium on new permits. The second thing I would do is to grandfather all existing operators so that our tourist economy is not disrupted while we figure out regulations. And then the third thing would be to use some of the permit fee money. I don't even think we've set fees yet, so we should probably set fees, right, for the permits. But to set some money aside for a research agenda. And this has been done in other communities facing much graver issues, such as gambling, legalized gambling. And the research agenda takes, all the data collected and basically sets a time frame and a framework for coming up with logical nexus for regulations. So, we basically close the floodgates, we protect everyone who's in the harbor and already operating so that we don't disrupt our economy. And then we need to, start looking at this from a much larger standpoint, involving other professionals who study nothing but short-term rentals. I think it's a very nuanced discussion. Brooke just brought up, a house that is occupied, never occupied, but I guess I have been, in my experience with short-term rentals, it is exactly that someone needs to rent the house because they can't live on Nantucket. So that is what, I just want a nuance that I want to bring out to the forefront. It's a lot more complex than just who lives or does not live here.
Thank you, Henry. Clifford.
Like everything else, the Daffodil Parade or the Wine Festival, short-term rentals has gone from this quiet little thing that went on to madness, can of worms, term arbitrary and capricious. I don't know, all these, it's opened us up to lawsuits and everything else because I could go on all day. Your home being used as a guest house, it just isn't lawful to begin with, so we can start with that. But unfortunately, we've been doing it forever. So how do we change it? You know, we can pass the law, like Matt said, where people have already been renting forever and they'd be exempt from the new permitting process. And I think maybe that'd be the best direction to go in because I think it's just going to be a mess. I tried to follow this whole thing. I'm relying on the Finance Committee's judgment to determine my vote because you start looking up all these regulations and you want to jump in front of the nerd bus. Yeah, I would just give an exemption at first so we can finally figure out which direction to go in and how many lawsuits are going to be filed against us. And mainly because someone buys a house for $35 million and they want to rent it and we tell them no, it's just going to get ugly. So anyway.
Thank you, Clifford. Penny Dye, your question, and the first respondent will be Brooke Moore.
Great. Thank you, Lee. Lee gave me credit for being involved in the Historical Association. It's actually the Housing Authority, Lee. You got my last name right, which is not easy, but I'm currently chair of the Nantucket Housing Authority. And through that, I serve as a seat on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And I hope that we're not having an illegal meeting right now with Chantal, Brooke, and myself here. I don't think we're quorum. I think it takes 4. I also currently serve as president of NAREB, the Nantucket Association of Real Estate Brokers. I think people in this community understand that there's a bundle of rights that goes with ownership of property, and that includes the right to rent until that right is taken away. There's been a dominant narrative on Nantucket now for over 2 years that large numbers of year-round houses are being bought up by investors from off island. Actually, there's clear evidence that the number of properties that rent on a short-term basis is declining, not increasing. And very few are owned, in fact, by investors from off island. In my office, it's less than 0.5% that is owned by people who have 2 or more properties. So my question is, for those of you that believe in the narrative, how do you define investors from off island? And more importantly, what is the documented data source that you have to support the claim that large numbers of year-round residences are being bought up by investors from off island? And for those of you who believe something else, feel free to comment upon it. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny. Brooke Moore.
Thanks for your question, Penny. I've been saying recently that the absence of data is not the same as proof something isn't happening, nor is it a predictor of future behavior. So I guess when I think about short-term rental regulations and codifying it under zoning bylaw, it's creating a protected right that allows the growth in the future. And while the investor-owned short-term rental market may not represent a large percentage of the market today, that's not to say that there isn't money heading our way that will be invested in that way. And I think I want to think forward about the decisions we make today and how that might impact what happens tomorrow. And so therefore, I'd like to understand the market better, understand who owns what, how they rent, and speak to everyone involved and try to figure out what is the reasonable zoning bylaw change that would have the least cost to those invested in the market already and protect the future in terms of how this industry will grow over time and what impact it will have on our ability of year-rounders to get housing. And I just want to add one quick thing about the concept of a moratorium. If we put a moratorium on permits, that basically prevents any year-rounder who's about to get into the housing market and needs short-term rentals to make that financial equation work for their bank to get a loan, unable to do so. So I think that's something we need to think about before we consider a straight moratorium out of the box. Thanks.
Thank you, Brooke. And next is Henry Sanford.
I don't need to answer this question too much because I don't buy into the narrative. I've been working in the short-term rental business, I mean, gosh, almost my whole life. My parents did short-term rentals when I was a kid. They still do short-term rentals to supplement their retirement income. I work in short-term rentals. The most predominant narrative is someone who wants to buy a house here as a vacation home, and because they either continue to work or have a more modest profession, they use short-term rentals to offset the ownership. Whether or not, I just feel I've heard this narrative before of just because we don't have any data doesn't mean nothing is happening. I agree with that to a certain extent, but that's also, you know, we need to be more specific when we're talking about property rights. I think that we could easily expand the owner, you know, the types of, like if we pass 42 and use 39 to then augment it, you know, things like the formula business could be very easy. You know, if you want to disincentivize investors, you should really go after their profits. I don't think investors will ever be overly psyched about Nantucket for the fact that we are only open 1/3 of the year. No one wants to rent in February. It's just cost prohibitive any way you look at it. It would have to be a very strange future that I don't want to say won't happen, but I'd rather just look at more realistic things of how to regulate the market now versus what we think the market's going to be, because often we're very wrong about that. So I don't think we should be hypothesizing about the future, because if anyone was to ask you in 2019 what you thought real estate prices were going to do after a global pandemic, I'm guessing everyone would have been wrong. So that's a very important thing. I just don't want to get ahead of ourselves. So
thank you, Henry. Clifford.
Yes, I'd like to echo like what Henry said. That question posed by Penny acts like I already had that opinion. I'm not even sure I had the opinion at all. I don't want to tell people what to do in their own properties. Obviously, like I said, it's a can of worms. It's grown like anything else in this town. Obviously, we have to address it. I saw where there's certain lawsuits that happened where we have to put something in our zoning, but I still think all that stuff is still conflicting with guest houses and commercial buildings, and like I said, it's just ugly. So we have to start somewhere. So I guess these articles are someplace to start, and hopefully it's not just another way to pick and choose who wins and who loses, because it's just another way to control people, whether or not the Board of Health or whoever is going to regulate this thing. It just drives me a little crazy when I don't see the specifics. And I've been in courts long enough. When I start looking at all these things, it just makes your head spin. Anyway, so I'll just start with what we have for these articles, and hopefully the FinCom has done their homework. But I really like to talk to legal counsel more on where this really stands. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Clifford. Julia Lindner is next, but before I introduce her, just an interjection from the moderator. Apologies to Penny. I had the schedule and it said NHA, and I made the wrong assumption. Thank you, Penny, and thank you for your service.
And gave me credit for something I didn't do. Did Matt answer the question?
I didn't, and I was going to ask you to frame it for me again, since it's going to take a while.
Yeah, just that there's been this dominant narrative for the last few years that large amounts of year-round homes are being bought up by off-island investors. If you believe the narrative, and I'm not suggesting you do, but if you do, what is the documented data source that you have to support that claim? Thank you.
Well, first off, I'm not sure I believe it entirely. I believe it's happening across the country. I think it is coming here. I'm not sure that, you know, that we can prove it. I do think it is growing. And I think the people with that narrative are not the only ones that maybe are wrong. We had a we had Jamie Howarth, the realtor, stand up and said, no one's asking, give me Mid-Island at last year's town meeting, as though that would never happen. And there are properties now selling, Rugged Road, et cetera, that year-round properties for $1.6 million, $1.8 million each. So people are asking, give me Mid-Island. So I think what we have to do, and I asked for this prior to last year's town meeting. I asked for the last year's town meeting. I asked for it again before this town meeting. I think we need to put a diverse group together with people like yourself, Penny, who have the knowledge, and with people on both sides, and get people to talk and come out with what will work. I think we have to figure out where the puck is going to go, not where it is today or where it was yesterday. And that hasn't happened. I would love to trust Clifford. I would love to trust the finance committee, but unfortunately, I don't think anyone has really delved into the various aspects of this deeply enough to make a really good decision for the island. And so I think that we're all stuck. I think part of why we're stuck here is because we haven't done the homework necessary to come up with the right path forward. And so then, and instead we've split each other, and we've been sort of fighting with each other. And, I trust Penny 100%. I think the real estate is getting squeezed a bit from two sides. And I don't think, and I do personally think that what will happen is what is happening in other committees, that in other communities. I think over time, I think there'll be pools of money, institutional money, that will park themselves here if they think that they can park for 10 or 20 years and get a really good return. And I think that something we have to discuss as a community. Is that something we want to have happen? And if we pass 42, that is more likely to happen. And I think so we have to, if we want to do that as a community, I think we need to have a real serious conversation about it first. I had hoped to make an amendment to 42, but 42 is so permissive, there's no amendment you can make to it. I'm looking at it saying, what amendment? I can't make any amendment to it. And so for that, for that reason, I'm concerned about that article. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you, Penny, for putting me back on track. Now, before I introduce Julia Lindner, one note on schedule. After the panelists ask their questions, members of the public may ask questions directed to our select board candidates, particularly pertaining to short-term rental. When that's all done, we're going to open up the question and answer period, and that's when our write-in candidates will have their opportunity to speak. So stay on board, stay tuned. It's a long afternoon, but I think it's a critically important one for the issues of democracy on Nantucket. And with that, Julia Lindner, who is, I believe, Executive Director of Act Now. Julia, your question. The first person to respond will be Henry Sanford.
Thank you, Lee. I will move on with my question quickly. There are many islanders, the Land Council, and this week the newspaper, all urging a no vote on Article 42 because it would effectively eliminate the tools to manage short-term rentals. If Article 42 is defeated, what's your suggestion for a constructive path forward and a community discussion?
Thank you. Henry.
Thanks for the question. Well, I think I already answered this on what we would do. So if Article 42 doesn't pass, but I'm assuming Article 39 does pass, is that fair to assume in this conversation?
If I can I answer, Lee?
Yeah, or you can shake your head.
I think the idea is that it doesn't matter what Article 39 does. I think that there's a general acknowledgement that our zoning needs to be amended in some way, shape, or form at some point. And if Article 42 fails, how are we going to get to the right solution?
Well, I don't, just to address your question, I don't believe that the loudest voices in the room represent the most people or even the correct opinion or, fact. I do believe, so I'm going to just assume that I have Article 39 in the first answer and then that I don't in a second. So if Article 39 is there, I'll do what I just talked about. We will create a reasonable moratorium within a specific date, a timeline that allows year-round homeowners to get, inside the safe harbor, we'll call it, and to prevent, the floodgates from being opened, as you all mentioned. So, that would probably be the first thing to do. Again, we need to come at this from a research point of view. And I think a lot of good research actually has been done, certainly has been done by the real estate community. Unfortunately, we have an issue with the perception of trust, but there is a lot of good work also I think could be done with the tax assessor to see what the makeup of our ownerships are and to publicize that information. So, I would probably go back to the research table, and I would also ask the planning board to allow another zoning article to be considered in the following town meeting, because if 42 fails, we might have the 2-year wait, right? Unless the planning board recommends. So I think that would probably be the first thing, is call up every member of the planning board and say, look, we need to get together. We really need to get past this issue. It sounds like everyone in this situation, including myself, I never thought I would say this, is getting sick of talking about short-term rentals. And it's something we need to move past to focus on larger issues. So it would be, working with the planning board, working with the tax assessor to see, who exactly we're dealing with as owners, and then bringing those constituents to the table, while also, the industry professionals who study this as a vocation. So I think that's, the way to go about it. Of course, we would want to include advocates for housing and preservation. I think those are absolutely concerns that we need to hear, but it's got to be focused on a logical nexus of reason. We can't just say no short-term rentals allowed for people who have the last name beginning with S. We need to have a logical framework here. So regardless of what passes, we should be striving towards that framework.
Thank you, Henry. Clifford.
Like I said earlier, this just is a can of worms. This reminds me of, when we talk about it, it reminds me of the difference between a licensed taxi and an Uber. So we require taxis to be inspected, licensed, pay fees, and then Uber does the same thing, doesn't have to follow any of the rules. So when we come to these things, and the point I'm trying to make is, like Matt says, or Henry says, we need to do this again and talk about it, and it drives me crazy because it goes on for years. Maybe we'll find out things we don't want to find out. And the biggest one, I believe, is how do you run, in a sense, a guest house in your house when it's not a commercial operation, doesn't have sprinklers, doesn't have all the things, fire escapes. So yeah, I guess we just continue to look into this and hopefully don't put ourselves in a position that we're in trouble. But I think it's out of control, like everything else in Nantucket. Like I said earlier, it started out as a great way to make some money, and now it's morphed into a liability. So I guess we have to form another meeting.
Thank you, Clifford. Matt.
All right, so you're asking what if, so 39 passes and 42 does not, what do we do? Is that more or less the question?
I think what I mentioned to Henry is, it's regardless of what happens to 39, we're going to have to amend our zoning. It seems, I think everyone's on the same page that the zoning needs to be amended somehow to make it clear what we want allowed, what we want not allowed in terms of short-term rentals, because they're not clear right now in our zoning bylaws. So if 42 fails, how do you propose to, move the community discussion?
I got you. All right. First off, I hope 39 doesn't. I hope 39 passes. I think it will gather a lot of the data that we need, and it will gather it on a yearly basis so that we can see the trends. And I think that's important. I would convene a work group like I've been asking for since prior to last year's town meeting with, with people from the industry and people on both sides of this, and agree on a set of facts to then agree on what the proper way to, a good path forward would be. I think, I agree with, I do think part of, one thing that is interesting that Clifford's talking about, Uber and taxis, et cetera, that is what's happening. When you haven't, when one, it's basic economics, when one group has an advantage over another, we'll pick short-term rentals versus hotels. If they're charged less on their taxes, if there's less regulation, et cetera, you're gonna get more of those. And I think, and what is happening with sort of the, what's happening with the gig economy, or whatever you call it, with all this, is they're finding ways to leverage those advantages. Uber's finding a way to avoid the regulation. And I think from Nantucket, we want to make sure that we do, we don't open that door wider. We want to make sure that we ask for what we want. If we don't want every single house or every third house or to be a mini hotel, then we better be careful on how we proceed. And I think when people say this is what it's been like for 100 years, well, it actually hasn't been like this for 100 years. It's been very different, and it is shifting. And so, there were room rentals, and and it was sort of cottages, et cetera, and it's turning into something very different. And it's full buildings, and a lot of, when I look at other communities, they have tackled this differently. They say, sure, you can do it, but you can't have commercial events on your property. We haven't even talked about that, but we've got some of the homes that we're talking about here. There's one in particular in Tom Nevers. They run a commercial event every weekend, and so we have to, as a community, say, is that acceptable? Is that what we want to do? And we haven't really delved into it enough, I don't believe. So
thank you, Matt.
All right, I've got dogs barking. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, we don't have a mute button for the dog. Okay, it is Brooke Moore's time.
Hi there. A robust and healthy short-term rental industry is clearly critical to our visitor economy. There's no question about that. What does that look like? What is a reasonable amount? Where? How much? Owned by whom? Are all these questions that remain unanswered? I just had a thought that came to my mind. A number of years ago, this community created a secondary dwelling bylaw. And as I understand it, the conversation around the implementation of that bylaw was that it was going to create more housing for residents of Nantucket. But we didn't put a deed restriction on those houses. And look what's happened. We have a ton of secondary homes and not enough year-round housing. So I want to make sure we craft the right zoning bylaw, understanding what it is we're hoping to accomplish and achieve as a community, and how to protect our year-round community, our visitor economy in appropriate ways, and do it right this time around. And if Article 42 does not pass, which I really hope does not happen, because I feel like that's locking the door open in a way that we may not be able to close it at all or to any degree. I agree that the select board could have and missed an opportunity perhaps to have the robust conversation and collect the information from the various stakeholders about what it is they hope to achieve and protect for themselves in this important short-term rental industry versus what the potential impacts and the unknowns of the future are. And I would want to make sure we don't create so much protection that we get ourselves in trouble in the long term and we can't rein it in, as opposed to balancing what we have now and making sure that it's not unfettered growth of this industry in the future. And I do think the comment about nobody wants Mid-Island is clear. That horse is well out of the barn. So we need to really think about the future in our conversations around this.
Thank you, Brooke. Everybody's going to keep me honest, but I think we've rotated around all four candidates on Julia's question. Julia, am I right on that?
No, I think Penny hasn't answered.
Penny hasn't. Thank you. No, Penny is a panelist. Sorry.
I'm so sorry.
I'm
so sorry.
not running for select.
Penny, I'm so sorry.
I'm the one we started with Henry and we ended with
answer
Brooke.
it though if you want me to. No,
I'm so sorry. I'm the one who's confused.
Okay, so our next panelist is Malcolm McNabb, a stalwart volunteer in our Board of Health. Malcolm, I think at one time you chaired the board. Your question, please, and we'll start with Clifford Williams after the questions posed.
Lee, I don't see Malcolm on the panel.
I'm just checking the same thing. I don't see his name on the panelist list. And so we move to Bruce Miller, whose name I did see. Bruce? Bruce, you're there, but your microphone is muted.
Thank you, Lou.
Now you're good to go. Hi, Bruce.
I had to get myself off mute. Thanks very much. I appreciate the opportunity to participate. I think this has been a really healthy discussion, but to somebody who doesn't pay that close attention to this subject, it really seems like a lot of inside baseball. I know it's very complicated, but some of us find it easier to understand these issues if we try to keep things as simple as possible. So I start with the supposition that if we pass Article 42, we're essentially allowing the most permissive zoning anywhere in the state. And to me, that just seems pretty extreme. And I say to myself, what's the hurry? Shouldn't we put a little more thought into formulating a long-term solution to a problem that is this complex? It's my point of view, but I find it to be reasonable nonetheless. Yet nearly every day for the past several weeks, I've been bombarded by frantic propaganda pieces from off island warning me that if we don't pass 42, the sky's going to fall. Meanwhile, from my standpoint, I think the sky is already falling. We have a critical shortage of housing and workers, and local businesses and town government are struggling to provide basic services. Why are we rushing to pass an article that will perpetuate the policies that have gotten us where we are today, and it will make a bad situation even worse? What am I missing?
Okay, Bruce, but you're supposed to ask a question.
What am I missing?
All right, Clifford.
What's the hurry, and what am I missing? I don't understand.
Clifford, what are we missing, and why do we need to rush?
I don't understand the urgency of making such an important decision that we don't fully understand, and I just feel like there must be more information available to us in order to make an intelligent decision.
All right, Clifford, your response, please.
All right, Bruce, thanks for the question. In one respect, it drives me crazy because there's some pretty educated people. I always judge how much trouble we're in. If I'm the smartest guy in the room, we know we're in trouble. So you'd like to find out, like I said earlier, it's a can of worms. So I think we need not just an idea of what you're going to do or zoning. You need a legal opinion, because I get back to the Uber and the cab thing. I don't know enough. I just know that this has been the elephant in the room for years, where what are we going to do now? The rentals are, I guess everybody assumes that everybody's buying these big properties and they want to rent them, and we want to stop that now. And I think it's just opening a can of worms. So you're right. We have to take some time and do it right. I wasn't involved in these things. I haven't been into any meetings. I just thought there was some big enough groups. I got flyers and papers from everywhere telling me to vote yes, telling me to vote no. Like I said, I went on to the state website to try and find the regulations and follow them. And like I said, I've been in court enough, even though I think I might understand these regulations, you'll probably find out that the word is doesn't mean what it means. So it's just ugly. So I have no problem waiting and moving on. So maybe we'd make that motion at town meeting to, I hate to say, form another committee and really find out what the ramifications are, not just with zoning, but as far as state law and federal law, and get to the bottom of it. So, like I said, I wish you. The first question was, what would you do? I was saying, I hope it would go away, but it's not going to. All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Clifford. Before I turn to Matt Fee, I do see Malcolm McNabb has joined us. Malcolm, you'll get your chance to answer to ask a question after this rotation. Matt Fee.
Yeah, I think what you're not missing it. I think you're seeing it's, what do they say? Politics. It's like making sausages. It's a messy business. I think you're seeing the messy business, and I think it's interest on all sides advocating for themselves and advocating their positions, and somewhat somewhat misleading people on other people's positions. And I think it all is a result of not, sitting in a room eye to eye and trying to find a credible, intelligent path forward. And I also, we need legal, but I also think that, sometimes town council is wrong. Sometimes he's following direction of staff, or he's following, doing something that, following something it's not. So this really is what is it we as a community want to do? And, what makes sense for us as a community? And I think we haven't done that. We haven't done that enough. And I think I'm not worried. People say there's a threat of a lawsuit. We've had lawsuits, but I think we have to accept that we're going to have a lawsuit. If we pass 42, there's going to be lawsuits. They'll just be different ones. We'll have a different set of lawsuits. If we pass something else, we're going to have potentially have something. So we have to accept that. I think if we're moving forward in a positive manner, I'd like to think that some of the reasons that people have sued will go away, because we're moving forward in a positive manner and their voices are being heard and they feel like the town is doing something about it. I think it's not, in my mind, it's not just a noise issue, which is, I think that's a bit of a false dilemma to say it's only noise and we'll put some rules in with the Board of Health and we'll keep everybody quiet. It's more nuanced than that. And so, again, I think let's find a way to, work through the process to come up with something that's acceptable.
Thank you, Matt. Brooke Moore.
This is a very hard topic not to get in the weeds on, so I'm going to try to be really careful. I've attended virtually every meeting where short-term rentals have been discussed, select board level, finance, planning. What we don't know is the intersection of the regulatory framework that the state set up and a very permissive zoning bylaw. There's no community that we know that has done a zoning bylaw like 42 and then attempted to regulate it with the state established framework that on which 39 is based. My greatest concern is that the way that Article 39 is currently written, it's very limited in its scope. And I've asked town council for an answer on this question and I've not gotten a definitive answer. What is the path by which that regulatory framework gets expanded beyond its current written form to do things that will actually to control and manage short-term rentals in the best interest of the island? I realize the power under the bylaw is given to the Board of Health and the Select Board, but town council indicated at one point that it may have to go back to town meeting in order to widely broaden the scope of the regulations under Article 39 to regulate who owns and operates short-term rentals, where they operate, how many days, et cetera. And if we open the floodgates with Article 42, there's very little incentive for people to come back to ATM and vote for regulations on themselves. And that is my greatest concern about the intersection of those two articles. So I think you're not missing the point, Bruce. I think the answer is we need to wait and figure this out and have a more thorough analysis of this marketplace and figure out what it is, what role it plays in our community, and how we want to manage it going forward before we codify it as strongly as Article 42 does.
Thank you, Brooke. Henry Sanford.
Okay, well, Bruce, I would say the biggest thing you're missing is that our town ZBA is currently being sued against its decision allowing the use to declare short-term rentals as commercial use in all zones, which would make the decision for us as a town and effectively ban them regardless of the consequences. So sure, it'd be great to have more time so long as that lawsuit was not a factor. So that, I would say that's number one. Number two, actually waiting and talking about it more and just having these discussions is what the town has been doing. So that is the status quo. The change would be to implement a regulation and then start working on it, right? Bylaws are amended. This is how we do things on Nantucket. It might be a little slow, but we pass 42, we pass for 39, and then you go back. You know, I have to disagree, I guess, with Brooke to say that someone wouldn't regulate themselves. Most people who own short-term rentals can't vote, actually around 90% of them. So we're talking about a pretty, year-round people who own short-term rentals that are not their primary residence are a very, very small populace. So I actually think we could have a reasonable discussion and vote on that without too many conflicting self-interests. I think that it's very important that right now, Ward versus Grape, when you go back and watch those meetings, as Brooke mentioned, when you look at what town council is saying, the big reason planning staff came up with 42 was to protect people who are doing short-term rentals from being sued. I mean, they said that just as I'm saying it to you now, and that was one of the main reasons. The reason it's permissible in all zones is because we've never talked about this and we've never had this discussion. And so they've been happening in all zones. If they were happening in just a few zones, maybe 42 could have just done that, but they're not. They've been going on in all zones for at least 20 years. When you look at the map of where short-term rentals are, I guess I just have to say on the side, there's a lot of information out there in the public sphere. UMass did a report on short-term rentals last year. The tax assessor has information on who owns what. I just find it slightly disingenuous when we say we can't do it. We're all capable of producing our own data. So I think that it's incumbent upon us to do the work. I know that, as a real estate agent, I've been trying to get a lot of information out of it. There's a trust perception that I mentioned before that's very difficult to get around. But engaging the constituency, with kind of an olive branch versus, arrows is a better way to go. And right now, I think a lot of people are scared. I mean, that's what I hear from my side of people who own short-term rentals. They are scared that they're going to be the next person to get sued. And I think we should all be concerned about Massachusetts Superior Court making a decision that will affect our welfare. I mean, we need to take this back to the voters. So that's what you're missing. That's the urgency.
Thank you, Henry. Malcolm, if you're on board, we'll give you the opportunity to ask a question. Malcolm McNabb.
Yes, I'm here.
Hello.
Sorry, unmute. Well, thank you. First of all, I am a member of the Board of Health, but I don't represent the Board of Health. Although the Board of Health has mentioned these articles, at no time has the Board of Health had any formal discussion. So I represent myself. And it's interesting to be the last questioner, I believe.
No, Stephen Morey is yet to come.
Okay, fine. So in many ways, listening to you all, you've sort of somewhat suggested how you might answer some of this question, but I will ask it anyways. And generally, these articles sort of tended to spontaneous generate from nowhere at various points. And I'm quite personally disappointed at how the entire discussion of short-term rentals has been approached on the island. And we have been acted much like the rest of the country on a lot of these issues. Advertisers promoting fear, and in many cases with undocumented claims or questionable documentation. It's not the way I believe that we should actually be going about a controversial issue. So I'm not going to ask a question so much about short-term rentals. I'm going to ask you a question about process. Can you give me an example, give us an example of how, as a leader of our government, you would improve the process when dealing with a controversial issue in the future?
Thank you. I believe the rotation puts us back to Matt Fee.
All right, thank you. Well, I would go back, Malcolm, to something that worked and was just as contentious. And this was the build out analysis. And Henry's dad, Ed Sanford, sat in a room. We put, 6 or 8 different people from all sides of the discussion. And they sat in a room. John Bergini said it was, and I'll pick the numbers out of the air, 10,000 homes. And one group said, no, it's, more than that. And no, it's less than that. And they argued for years. And so they sat in a room, they went lot by lot, and they counted everything and they agreed upon what they counted on. And lo and behold, they came out within a few houses of what the, staff thought the build out was. So we had agreement for a number of years. I think that type of process needs to happen with this. And I think it will work. I've had conversations with people on all sides of this already. And I think there is a fair amount of agreement. I think that we have been, just like you said, I think we've had, had arrows out. People have, have been assuming certain things and not talking to people honestly and not being face to face. And I think that this is an issue, in not being honest about motivation. I think some of this is a lack of staffing at the planning level. And so I think that has to be acknowledged. If we don't have the wherewithal to do something, we should be able to say that and try to find a solution. And so, for those reasons, I think, how would I do it? I'd go back to what we've done before, and I'd put a process in place where all sides, are comfortable, are comfortable and, and required to be honest and forthcoming and come out with a good result.
Thank you, Matt. Brooke Moore.
Neighborhood first. The select board, the Affordable Housing Trust established an advisory group that was appointed as an official committee of the town that held public meetings for a year. We analyzed the articles that passed a town meeting, assessed our options on how to deploy the funds that were allocated under that article. And we came to agreement on strategies to move forward. We determined what questions we were being asked to answer. We answered them and figured out how to move forward. That's the model. I think there has to be an official advisory group that is subject to a public open meeting law, and that everyone comes together and has opportunity to present their opinions, whether they sit on the board or not, and to make sure that that work group is representative of the various constituencies that have a stake in what happens under this zoning bylaw change.
Thank you, Brooke. Henry Sanford.
Thank you. I mentioned this earlier, a research agenda. This was done with gambling, when gambling was legalized and started being implemented in neighborhoods outside of Boston. A far more harmful, arguably, activity and controversial issue. They were able to establish a research agenda with, academics who have I think the first thing is we need a little more trust. The UMass Institute did a study on short-term rental ownership makeup. And I think most people wrote it off because it was funded by the Copley Group. The level of cynicism there to think that academics would risk their reputation to further the agenda of some guy who owns short-term rentals on Nantucket is very cynical. So we need to get beyond that, but a research agenda can help with that because it moves the conversation into an academic sphere, but it also sets benchmarks when they're going to be reported. They hold the town halls that Brooke just mentioned, right? So there's the public airing of opinion, but that's not the only thing that matters. I mean, again, the loudest voice in the room is not always the one who is right or who's going to make the best decision. It needs to be considering opinions so that people build trust and then marrying those opinions with the underlying science. And a research agenda, I think the Gambling Commission, even the fertilizer, I think Rick Atherton made a great suggestion about the fertilizer issue was discussed. I think I agree with Matt, something like the build out. I think this comes down to a larger discussion of our capacity as an island. But it needs to be underpinned by hard facts that we could all agree on, and we need to drop the cynicism on both sides. So that's what I would suggest.
Thank you, Henry. Clifford Williams.
Yeah, I hope I can answer this. I think Henry points to it, and Matt made a comment a couple questions ago about town council. He said that the town council doesn't always give you, I hope I get it right, the right answer. He gives you maybe the answer that town administration wants you to hear. And I think first we need that leadership that we can trust and an opinion that we can trust. And I think we have a problem with that. So not to put words in Matt's mouth, but I think we lack that. And a lot of people rely on all these volunteers to come up with the answers for us and then for us to make a judgment. So I think we need trustworthy leadership first before we can move forward.
Thank you, Clifford. Dr. McNabb, I've been debating within myself whether or not I should interject, but I will remind everybody that there was an impasse in town meeting some years ago about how to deal with fertilizers. And Michael Kopko, at the time a member of the select board, said, I have an alternative motion for town meeting to consider. Let's form a work group. And since I was secretary to that work group, and we did produce a document on how to use fertilizers, and we did produce some regulations, that might be an alternative. And as I say, I apologize because the moderator should stay out of the fray and see how the candidates respond to the question, which I think they have done. Our final panelist is Stephen Maury. Stephen is a colleague of ours on the executive committee of the Nantucket Civic League and also a member of the finance committee. Stephen, your question, which will be, I'm trying to remember, I think Brooke Moore gets to go. No, it's probably Clifford. I think Clifford will get to go first.
You guys know the rotation, if we don't. Anyway, nice to see you all. Good of you all to give up this sunny Saturday afternoon to talk about these important issues. So I won't be brief. This is a fairly long question, but I think it's important. The 2020 census confirmed what I think everyone listening understood already, that Nantucket was growing fast. Over the decade from 2010 to 2020, we added almost 30% to the count of what they call occupied dwellings. Those are not seasonally occupied, but those are people who live in their homes, at least when the census takers come to find them, which is typically in the middle of the winter. At the same time, the total population count grew on a percentage basis faster than any county in the Commonwealth. As a result, and as you can imagine, the municipal budget to meet the needs of the community has grown quite a bit as well. When I joined the Finance Committee in 2013, the Finance Department produced a document. You can still find it on the Finance Department's website, on the town's website. There was a 10-year budget forecast, and the budget recommended for fiscal year 23 was modest in comparison to what the actual budget recommendation was last year. In fact, the actual budget recommendation was 36% higher than what we had forecasted to be 9 years ago. So how does the town deal with that and still have the second lowest tax rate in the Commonwealth? It deals with it a couple of ways. Through new growth, certainly we've seen building and new taxable properties help cover some of that gap. But we've also realized just last year a great revenue source from short-term rentals. In fact, we realized almost $5.8 million of receipts from the expansion of the occupancy tax to cover short-term rentals of homes. That represents nearly 5% of the total appropriations from the general fund. So now to the question. If short-term rentals are banned, either by a court decision, if Act Now's legal action is successful in overturning the Zoning Board of Appeals decision, or if Article 43 were to pass and a vast majority of short-term rentals are made unallowed, how do you propose that the town make up for that loss of revenue? And how do you propose the taxpayers who are affected by the loss of their own revenue cope with that?
Stephen, thank you. I've been looking at my schedule, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Brooke Moore is the one to respond to this question. If I'm wrong, somebody wave at me. Otherwise, Brooke, go ahead.
So I'm not sure anyone's proposing a vast cutback in the number of short-term rentals on Nantucket. That's not what's the idea of reasonable regulations does not imply that we cut back enormously or in great numbers the number of short-term rentals that exist on Nantucket. My concern about short-term rental regulation is the future growth of the industry more than what exists today. So I'll be clear on that. We've tied, when the short-term rental tax passed, the conversation at the select board level was that this was a great way to fund investment in year-round and affordable housing. That didn't happen. It took several years to get $2 million of that money allocated to the municipal housing office for affordable housing and year-round housing efforts. It's a small percentage of what's come in a brand new revenue stream. It is a valuable revenue stream. There's no doubt about it. But once we tie the future of Nantucket's budget to an industry that must grow in order to meet the demands of more and more, we've set ourselves up in a cycle that's not healthy for the community. And clearly we didn't do what was intended with the majority of that money to help solve the year-round and affordable housing crisis. That's been a frustration for me. And our property taxes are substantially lower than any community because of the valuation we have here. And I know that I moved from Vermont to here with properties with similar valuation. I went from paying $14,000 a year to $2,000 a year in taxes for a house valued the same way. I just worry that now that we've tied our purse strings to short-term rentals, that this argument that we shouldn't regulate it is it's I don't know, it's frustrating to me because I'm not sure that the unfettered growth of that industry is healthy for Nantucket in other ways besides the budget.
Thank you, Brooke. Henry Sanford. Henry, you're muted.
I'm really sorry, guys. Embarrassing. To reframe, if short-term rental tax revenue is drastically reduced, how do we make it up? Correct?
Yes.
Okay. So there's a few ways. I think Brooke just alluded to it. You raise property taxes. I don't think that's what anybody wants. I think that you will very quickly tax out a lot of year-round owners if you do that. The other way to look at it is to start selling town assets. I believe, should sell some town assets, but we'd probably have to look at that through a different lens. I would imagine, as any organization might suffer somewhere between a 2 and 5% cutback, that everyone's going to feel some pain for a little bit. For homeowners, that's where I, have strong feelings, because they don't have the ability, like the town, to maybe borrow more money, which could be another option, not a good one. But on a household basis, it's a much more scary picture, because most people aren't looking at how they're going to survive 10 years from now. They're looking at their costs, like normal people, every year, right? You do your taxes, you look at next year, you hope. Some people maybe are even in shorter windows than that. I guess I disagree with, so the two things about short-term tax revenue that I think we should really understand. First of all, just because we have plenty of harm reduction models, that we use funds from industries that we don't want to see unlimited growth of, to then subsidize other things. The marijuana tax for education, alcohol and tobacco tax for healthcare, real estate sales for the land bank, right? All of those things have gone to help us. And I just think that's another thing, is that, just because someone has a disagreement on whether an industry shouldn't, there's other ways for an industry to grow and us increase that tax without actually growing build out. So the land bank is classic. In the 1990s, there was far more land for sale than there is now. However, the land bank's collecting more money now than it ever has been. And that's because prices increased. So we'll most likely see prices increase in short-term rentals. That could facilitate. We also have an extra 2%, roughly 1/3 of our collection, that we could implement onto short-term rentals. This is a visitor paid tax, not a property tax, not a land tax, not paid by any homeowner. It's all visitor paid. And we could raise that and still subsidize these things. And when we look at what we need, we do need that money. So I reject the idea that you'd have to see unfettered growth and you kind of be like tied to this industry, because that's not the case for the land bank. It's not the case for cigarettes. It's not the case for alcohol, and it's not the case for marijuana. So I guess this would be like the only thing. But again, there's no real precedent for that. I think we should be leveraging the tax and increasing it, quite frankly, because it's not paid by citizens. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Henry. Clifford, how will we pay for it?
Well, that's the, again, elephant in the room, because you can only raise the taxes, 2.5%, unless you have an override. The unfortunate part is, I think that really ravages our budget every year, is Blue Cross and Blue Shield. It's been going up, 10, 15, 20% forever. I remember when my healthcare cost $5,000. Now it's $25,000. So these are the expenses that outpace the levy, which is the property taxes we collect. So it's just a, I don't know if we're in a train and the bridge is out in front of us, but it's just something that we're lucky enough that we've had this magnificent growth that's, I think, subsidizes the need as far as expenses for the town. So I think Steve mentioned they thought it was going to be one amount of money, and it's projected much higher. So I think that just gets back to things like the healthcare insurance, OPEB, which is other post-employee benefits, the cost of what it takes for the town to pave a road or maintain buildings, and it's just it's ugly. It's kind of like this short-term rental tax question. It's just, how do you keep up with it? And eventually, the only thing we can do, you never want to operate your town, your schools, your fire, off of one-time revenue, which would be marijuana tax or this short-term rental tax. You want to do it all based on the property tax, because when the economy slows down or something goes bad, that's the only mainstay that you have of revenue. Like everything else, you have to meet the challenges. You have to raise the taxes, or you need to cut back. So that's the reality. If you've ever been on the finance committee, you learn that really quick. There's never enough money. Every year somebody comes, they want another project done, and it always sounds great, and they always sound desperate. And then after you've been there long enough, you realize every year there's just more people want more money. So you finally have to say no, and you have to prioritize what you do. And the economy goes bad. We've seen it in the past. You either have to lay people off or cancel programs.
Thank you, Clifford. Matt, the last word.
All right, thank you. I think Steve, I know you don't mean this. I think you're sort of creating a false dilemma here. I don't think anyone wants to ban short-term rentals, or completely ban them. And so I don't think that's at stake here. I also, I think that the threat of legal action, if you read the Styler case closely, at the bottom, it said, we came up with this decision, but in a community that has a history of it, we may have come up with something different. So I'm fairly confident that we would be allowed to do short-term rentals here in a legal challenge. I'm also fairly confident in that if we're moving forward, that you won't see those lawsuits in the next, I just think we're doing it because they're frustrated. We're talking about how do we pay, and then you start talking about the budget, and you're on one of my favorite topics, which is, tax rates and how we pay for things, et cetera. Our rate is low, but our values are high. Our average is average, based on, our median is average based on the value of the wages that people make out here. Our average wage, we're not like some of we always compare ourselves to Wellesley or, some really wealthy town with people are making $500,000 each. And, we're not, and we're closer to some of the towns in Western Mass. I think what's happening, so how do we pay for it? We're paying for it through overrides. Growth doesn't pay for itself. We have a big backlog of roads and sidewalks and a bunch of other things and positions that we need that we haven't been able to fund. We've grown, but there's not enough money. And so, I think that there's a misconception that growth pays its way. And when you really look at the numbers, it doesn't. We're fortunate to have it because it's allowed us to keep a finger in the dike, but it really hasn't. I think, unfortunately, what's going to happen with, so you can only go up 2.5% a year on your taxes. That's true. But if you live in a neighborhood that's becoming gentrified, you will find that your taxes can go up a lot more because your house will be reassessed. I'm kind of scared of what the assessments will be on my employee housing because the neighborhood is becoming more high end. And I think my 3 lots are going to double or triple in value. That's great if I'm going to sell them, but I don't plan to sell them. I keep employees in them. And so all of a sudden I'm going to be paying 2 or 3 times as much on those properties. And so that's what is one of my concerns with what is happening is that we are bidding up the prices in all these neighborhoods which people have low tax rates right now, low total tax, forget the rate, low total tax bills, and they're going to increase. So the town we're saying we have $60 million and it's going to cost the average homeowner $300, but that's the average homeowner. There's small businesses that have employee housing, they pay commercial rates, and they have a bunch of other things that are required to keep their business operating. And we know, I'm one of them, and Toscana and a bunch of other people, they're going to face a lot more than $300 this year. And so I think, how are we paying for it? Sure, we're paying for it through the percentage, but we're also paying for it in a hidden way through the increase in property values that and these guys are all going to face. And so I think that, what we need is we need to have a balance, and we need to find what is the balance that will work and that is fair. And I think that, and so that's not, and I have, and on the select board, I've served on a board where one of the members wanted to, he wanted to give all the residential exemption to the maximum amount to help the islanders. And I have said, and I held the line because I knew the day was coming when we were going to have, where we were going to have a slowdown, but we were going to still need to spend a lot of money on, to catch up on the money that we needed for roads, et cetera. And that's the point where we need to be able to raise the residential exemption for year-round residents. If we had raised it before, everyone would be screaming in a few years when we have to, when we get more expenses. So I think you have to have a balance, and you have to have sort of the fiscal vision, future vision, and be able to manage those numbers in a way that helps the year-round residents, helps the people who are trying to stay here. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Matt had the last word, but not quite. There's at least one question coming from members of the audience, our attendees. And I have promised write-in candidates that they would have the opportunity, when this panel discussion is finished, to make a presentation. To the 40 attendees who are still on board, we've got another 10 or 15 minutes to go. It was a moderator's decision that this is a very important function, and I didn't cut it off. You would have all had my hide if I had done. Now, I would like to point out that this is being recorded. The link will be at NCTV 18 or the Nantucket Civic League, nantucketcivicleague.com, nantucketcivicleague.com. If you want to ask why we didn't get ORG, it's because we didn't apply in time. But that's neither here nor there. It will be on YouTube, and with your functions, you can jump around the recording to the time of the day that you want. We have one question from Ann Dewis. Ann has been patiently raising her hand for the last hour. Ann, your question to the select board.
Thank you very much, Lee. I'm going to ask the question, but to be honest, I'm not going to ask for an answer because I think it's very important to get to our write-in candidate. But I think it's worth thinking about. It's something that I have actually raised with the Civic League about a month ago, as I've thought through the various challenges that we're facing. I think I'm hearing more and more that we're likely to have a defeat of both 42 and 43, which I support wholeheartedly, which means we go to a new process, a study group, a series of forums. We don't know what yet. The question I would throw out there that I hope people will think about, because I think we're getting there, is exactly how is that going to happen? Under whose aegis will a new process to try to figure this out in a more balanced and coherent and civil way? How is that going to happen? Who's going to run it? What organizations will be involved? And is there room for a professional here? Quite frankly, I think there is, but I throw that out, and please don't bother to answer. Thank you.
And I heard your disclaimer. However, if any of our select board candidates have an explicit answer, we'll entertain it. Otherwise, we'll call a halt. Matt, you came up on the screen. It may be because you just moved and your camera caught that. No.
No,
okay.
I hadn't got my hand. Henry and Brooke have their hands up. I may answer, but I may not. Let them speak.
You remind me to check. Yes. Henry, and then Brooke.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Is why I brought up the Gambling Commission a few times. A research agenda is handled usually by an independent academic who has background qualifications, not only in the issue, but also the skills. We would most likely want to employ an economist and someone else who has dealt with short-term rentals. We are actually kind of pretty far down the line when you look nationwide. You know, Hawaii started implementing short-term rental regulation in the 90s, right? So we have plenty of experiences to draw upon, but also there's a lot of people out there who know far more about this and also are, again, unconnected to our community, which we could probably all benefit from. So implementation of a research agenda that is handled by third-party academics.
Thank you, Henry. Brooke.
I think I said this already, but this clearly falls in my mind as a select board initiative because it crosses over planning, zoning, affordable housing, health code, Board of Health. So the leadership on this should come from the top, and all of those boards should be represented along with community constituencies. And I absolutely believe professionally facilitated conversations can always be useful to have an independent, objective, unbiased person leading the conversation, particularly in something that it has been as contentious or heated as this conversation leading up to town meeting has been. Thanks.
Thank you, Brooke. And with that, Brooke, you just really did have the last word. I'd like to thank the candidates for a select board. I'd like to thank the panelists. I've already thanked Josh Balling and Chantal Blaise Murphy for their efforts, but I'd add that in. Once again, I'll remind everybody that this is being recorded and will be posted within a matter of hours to YouTube. And the final section on my now somewhat time overrun schedule is I apologize. The final session is for those write-in candidates and their filed candidates whom we didn't invite because they were at the time unopposed to speak. And I know that Emmy Kilvert is here. So we're going to start with Emmy Kilvert, write-in candidate for the planning board. And in my summary statements, I will say that we've heard from others. But Emmy, you start. A minute, please. You're on mute. Oh, yeah, there you go.
All right, 1 second. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate this opportunity to introduce myself, and I want to thank the Civic League for organizing this forum. My name is Emmy Kilvert, and I'm running as a candidate for the 3-year seat on the planning board. I am here today because I believe in sensible growth for Nantucket. Change is inevitable, but we must be mindful of the long-term effects. Anticipating change and planning to incorporate it into Nantucket's special character is a goal we should all have. I will offer a fresh perspective to the planning board. Like many of us, I have lived on Nantucket both as a seasonal and year-round resident for my entire life. Being a mother and watching my children grow to love Nantucket the way I do makes me so happy. Nantucket is a unique and special place that is facing challenges, and it is up to us to make thoughtful decisions for future generations. I am no stranger to complex challenges. My husband and I own a local business, and for the past 2 years, I've chaired the Rising Sea Level Committee at Nantucket Yacht Club. As you can imagine, these roles require me to process complicated information and pay attention to details. I also have a track record of caring involvement in the community. Getting Nantucket Ice off the ground was a lot of work, but we were successful because we planned, were persistent, hardworking, and visionary. I look at the challenges confronting Nantucket similarly. If we are persistent, hardworking, and visionary, we will preserve Nantucket while we prosper. The planning board deals with many complex legal issues, but really its work is about land use. Working in my family's insurance business has taught me much about Nantucket's neighborhoods and environment. That background, my life experiences, my personal values, and my capacity to learn, listen, evaluate will be important contributions to the board. I hope you agree, and I hope I will earn your vote on May 10th. I am a write-in candidate for the 3-year seat. So if you need more information about how to vote for me, I hope you will ask or see my ad in the Thursday's Inquirer Mirror. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you again to our moderator, Lee Saperstein, and the Civic League. And I'm happy to take questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmy. The filed candidate for that seat was invited to respond, and he apologized, said he is running for the position with vigor, but that he was scheduled for something else this afternoon, particularly when we hadn't invited him. But just to know that we have had a response from the filed candidate. Now, before I sign off, we had heard that the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board, HSAB, which all Nantucketers call SHAB or SHAB, have got write-in candidates as well. I have not seen their names and I have not seen a hand raised, but I am giving that opportunity to raise their hand. I'm going to count a very low number, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Lee,
Yo, you're there.
Dave Bossy, I've got my hand, I got all my hands raised, including my electronic.
Oh, okay. You're down as a panelist, as is Scott Anderson. Thank you for doing that. I was looking at I have 2 lists for participants, panelists and attendees, and I've got to toggle back and forth between them. Dave Bossy, go ahead.
Thank you, Lee. I just want to explain, I'm running as an incumbent for SHAB. I've been on there for 3 years, and I just wanted really to explain why I am a writing candidate. I was on the 6 o'clock vote the day before you could pull papers, and I returned at 4:40. The afternoon you had to turn your papers in. So I simply was off on vacation and missed the entire paper pulling exercise and getting signatures. So I also missed the ballot. I didn't miss any SHAB meetings, however, because we've been meeting by Zoom for the past couple of years, as has everyone else. Just for the past 3 years, actually, it takes a year or so to get settled, but once we got a good working group together, we turned over a couple of large pieces of advice to the select board, which were accepted, the liveaboard housing regulations for the summer liveaboards, as well as we had a long drawn out affair with an oyster lease in our harbor that was untended for many years, and we finally worked through after 18 months and another 6 months with the select board, and worked through what appears to be a good solution to that lease, and it's being transferred to sold and transferred to someone else. So it's an interesting board. I have a good background of outdoors water for most all my life, and in the coming years, we're going to, right now, we're planning to discuss stormwater drainage on the island and how it drains to the harbor, as well as the climate change that we're all talking about, and including sea level rise. So that's it. Look for everyone's support. Just wanted to introduce myself, and this was a very enlightening afternoon. I just wanted to say it was good to hear everybody speak. Thank you.
Dave, I'm glad you called out, because I didn't want to be guilty of cutting anybody off simply because I mismanaged the participant list.
No problem.
Dave, just one, not technical question, but just procedural question. As I understand it, there are 3 vacancies on SHAB, 2 filed candidates and 2 write-ins. Am I correct in that? That's one correct, of the write-ins is almost, well, the one with the most votes guaranteed to get a position. whether or not the write-ins exceed the votes for the filed candidates.
That's correct. We actually hit the same type of situation 3 years ago when I first ran, because there were I think only one filed to run, and I ran as a write-in then too for the same reason. I simply wasn't here, and it was effective. So, but yes, that's true. Right.
Okay, Scott Anderson, you're up, please.
Yes, well, I am a filed candidate for the SHAB position. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to introduce myself. I'm somebody who moved to the island full-time in October, and I've been following scalloping since I first started scalloping here in 2004. I love this place, and when I saw vacancies, I said, you can't sit on the sidelines, Scott. You got to get involved. So I do have a fairly in-depth background. I have 41 years in the insurance industry. I was a consultant and advisor to the Insurance and Risk Management Board for the state of Connecticut and the Attorney General's office. I have numerous background for mitigating and resolving complex claim issues such as water pollution by sewer treatment companies that go into rivers and how you come up with a solution to that. I know we're stretched for time, so I didn't want to go through my whole resume and background, but I have dealt with problems in reservoirs with oil running into reservoirs, and how do you deal with that? I read in the paper all the time the issues we're having with decreased scallops, some of the pollution that was left after the water company was, I guess, installing piping. And I just want to be involved. I think I have a background that could help people. I like to collaborate. I don't have a specific agenda. I just want to participate, serve this town, which is a great place to live. And thank you.
Thank you, Scott. I had a question on the Q&A to remind people. It's Scott Anderson and Dave Bossi, B-O-S-S-I, as write-in candidates for SHAP, which shows up as the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board, and Emmy Kilbert as write-in candidate for the 3-year term on the Planning Board. And before I shut this off, this I can answer. The Q&A said, but by the way, how do you vote for a write-in candidate? Priscilla and I, Mrs. Saperstein and I, have already voted. And so I can attest that in each position, there is the printed names of the filed candidates and then a line for write-in. And what you do is you write in the name and then check that box. Make sure you check that box for the write-in candidate. And I hope that helps. Okay, folks, it's been a long, long afternoon, but a fruitful one. And I'm looking out the window and it is beautiful and sunny, but I know it's also 52 degrees. So you've got to be moving around fast to stay warm on an afternoon like this. But maybe it's a good thing. Get out and have that walk now because we're about to shut down. Don't forget, the recording will be on YouTube in a very short while. My thanks to Ryan Fitch, our technical specialist from NCTV 18. He's the one that moved you around so that the write-in candidates could get their faces before the camera. He's the one that opened up muted microphones. Thanks to Ryan, most especially thanks to every participant. This has been invaluable. Good night, all.